From the moment he was born, Charles Ronan bore the stigma of being the murderer who killed his mother. Yearning for his family's acceptance, he became a knight, surpassing all others, even the men. But he didn't know this would be the source of his tragedy. Every time the emperor declared he would make Charles a living sword, he believed it was a sign of the emperor's favor. When the day finally came, he readily agreed. He never imagined becoming a sword meant becoming a literal one. Shackled and chained, he was locked away in a lightless cell, forced to consume ashlight fragments, harvested from monsters, and brimming with the power of creation. Day after day, Charles became the sole survivor among countless test subjects. His body transformed entirely into steel, forged into a magnificent blade. But the horror was this: his consciousness remained. The emperor, using his family as leverage, commanded his obedience. He didn't want to kill, yet he became the emperor's instrument of death. Generation after generation of royalty built their glorious achievements upon his suffering. They were lauded as heroes. Only he, fully aware, was tormented by the guilt of the slaughter. Despair and agony consumed Charles as he prayed to the gods for another chance at life. He prayed to punish those who dared to defy the Creator, to no longer be a cursed sword. His anguish and countless pleas finally reached the gods. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself in flesh and blood. His first instinct was to find a mirror, but after 400 years as a sword, he had forgotten how to walk. He scrambled desperately towards the mirror, and only when he saw his youthful face did he believe he had truly returned. For 400 years, he had been nothing but a weapon safeguarding the empire. Simply because the emperor desired glory and prosperity for the empire, he had endured such torment. Not a single person felt any remorse for him. The reflection in the mirror twisted with rage. He swore vengeance. He would drag the empire into an endless abyss, forcing its citizens to lament their existence in such a nation. Charles's mother had died giving birth to him, and his family had placed the blame squarely on his shoulders. In his previous life, to earn their affection, he had honed his prodigious talent and tireless efforts to become a master swordsman. Now, he no longer held such naive desires. He had done nothing wrong. Before his rebirth, he loathed summer, often remaining indoors. His mother had died in childbirth during the summer months. Now, things were different. He had a body again. He stepped out of his self-imposed confinement. Even knowing from a maid that his father was returning, he felt no desire to avoid him. He refused to waste any emotion on them. Charles gazed at the brilliant sun, feeling the ashlight power within him. It hadn't vanished with his rebirth. Over centuries, the magic had become intertwined with his very soul. He could confidently say that with this power, he was formidable. A clang broke his contemplation. He turned to see a sword that had flown through the air. He picked it up, swinging it expertly, his gaze fixed on the blade. He addressed the hurrying knight without turning. "Seems you lost your grip during a spar." The man shamefacedly admitted it. Charles realized then that in his past life, he had misinterpreted that look as disdain. Now he saw it for what it was: envy and shame. From birth, he'd had no tutor. The Sword Duke's aversion to training him was one reason. The primary reason, however, was that no one was capable of teaching him. He walked slowly towards the training grounds. Instructing the knight who had dropped his sword, Charles found that centuries of bloodshed had honed his perception. Coupled with the power of the monster fragments, he could instantly discern another's strengths and weaknesses. Returning to the mansion from the training grounds, he summoned all the maids. His voice, cold and haughty, filled the room. "You've already guessed why I've called you here, haven't you?" The soft yet oppressive tone made the maids cower, none daring to speak. Charles began to remind them, one by one, of their transgressions. The scalding tea deliberately spilled on him, the mice placed in his blankets. There were those who'd slipped insects into his soup, those who'd ripped his dress to humiliate him. One by one, the perpetrators of these cruelties knelt before Charles, begging for forgiveness. Charles, however, merely smiled, a gentle, chilling curve of his lips. "If only you'd known, then what you know now," he murmured, the soft words belying the steely glint in his eyes. His decision was absolute. You are all dismissed. Born a duke's child, entitled to every luxury and affection, Charles found himself utterly alone on his birthday. This solitude, however, was not unexpected, nor did it disappoint him. He had been pampered his entire life, a gilded cage built to break him. But his purpose was clear: to make the royal family pay. Tucking away the completed application for the royal tutor position, Charles went to visit his mother's memorial. Today also marked the anniversary of her death. Gazing at the elegant, dignified face in the portrait, Charles spoke to the mother he had never known, sharing his decision. He would live this life on his own terms. His plan for revenge was already meticulously laid out. This was a dark path, one with no return. Today, standing here, he truly severed ties with his former self. As he left, he unexpectedly encountered the awkward knight with the flying sword. The knight stammered a birthday greeting. Perhaps he was the only one who would offer such a sentiment. The servants feared him, afraid to even meet his gaze. Charles paid them no mind. Rounding a corner, he came face to face with his father and brothers. Their eyes, as always, held a cold disdain. But unlike before, Charles met their contempt with indifference. As they passed, a voice called out Charles. Turning, he saw his blonde-haired brother, the only one in his family who had ever shown him any kindness. But 400 years had passed. His brother had long forgotten his name. As his brother questioned why he hadn't offered a greeting, Charles's eyes hardened with disgust. "Because you are not worthy," he stated coldly. Once, Charles had been a girl who smiled easily. But that bright smile had long since faded, eroded by the torture of the past 400 years. Since making an example of those maids, dismissing them without hesitation, Charles's authority within the Duke's household had grown considerably. No one dared underestimate him now. The head maid fawned over him, and, step by step, he gained control of the entire ducal estate. For 2 years, he dedicated himself to honing his potential, strengthening his magic circles, and securing the position of royal tutor. Even the student he would teach was a carefully chosen piece in his elaborate game. The 13th prince of the empire. Just as in his past life, this prince was a prodigy destined to rule. Intelligent and decisive, yet also suspicious and cruel, the future emperor would ruthlessly eliminate any opposition, becoming his tutor, guiding him to the throne, and shaping him into a tyrant. This was a crucial part of Charles's plan. In his past life, Charles had possessed unparalleled talent, becoming the undisputed greatest swordsman in the empire. Yet, the royal family, using magic and a shard of a monster, had forged a cursed sword. For 400 years, he had been forced to kill. Reborn, he lived only for revenge. 2 years of meticulous planning had led him to this moment, becoming the 13th prince's swordsmanship instructor. To avoid the tragedies of his past, despite his already masterful swordsmanship, he had leveraged his family's influence to become an honorary knight. This was the first and last time he would use his family's power. From this day forward, all debts and grievances with them were settled. Today was his first meeting with the 13th prince, Dylan. Knowing Dylan's inherent wariness, Charles had carefully chosen his attire, aiming for a resemblance to his kind and graceful mother, the princess. He wore a simple, elegant white dress, complemented by a circlet of pale blue flowers. The effect, however, was minimal. Even his usually indifferent Duke father had inquired about the details of his appointment as royal tutor. Dylan, however, remained impassive, merely curious. Charles took the initiative, raising a question only to subtly deflect it. He knew that to tame this young prince, he needed to maintain an air of mystery, to remain just beyond his grasp. Only when Dylan realized Charles wasn't all-knowing could he begin to exert control. This was the crux of his revenge. If one plan failed, there were others. When a butterfly, drawn by the honey Charles had strategically smeared on his flower circlet, landed near him, Dylan showed his first flicker of interest in another person. Even though his expression remained unchanged, his words, "From now on, you are my teacher," were an acknowledgement of Charles's position. And so, Charles took up residence in the palace. Later, while bathing, the magic-eating sprite returned, this time bringing a friend. Because of his partial elven heritage, Charles could see the ethereal beings, and, possessing seemingly limitless magic, he greeted them with a warm outpouring of power. The tiny sprites danced gracefully, expressing their gratitude as they basked in the gentle magic of the kind and charming Charlize. Watching their departure from the corner of his eye, Charlize mused that their grateful nature might prove useful to him someday. He hoped everything would go smoothly, but things rarely go as planned. As he closed his eyes, contemplating how to handle the shrewd and intelligent young prince, a chilling wave of murderous intent washed over him. With agile grace, he dodged the attack, his hand flashing out, a blade appearing as if from nowhere, striking the assassin dead. He couldn't help but find it ironic. Everyone whispered that he was nothing more than a knight in name only. Charlize sighed, offering a silent explanation to the lifeless assassin. An honorary knight was still a knight, after all. With a complicated mix of emotions swirling within him, Charlize used his magic to cleanse the scene. He hadn't expected an assassination attempt on his first day as a tutor, and the list of suspects was long. Dylan had always been unassuming, never displaying the cunning and martial prowess expected of a future king. But now, Dylan's decision to begin sword training was a clear declaration of his intent to enter the fray for the throne. Charlize didn't need to guess. Dylan was undoubtedly facing his own assassins at this very moment. But rushing to his aid would expose Charlize's true abilities. He trusted his instincts, certain that his solitary presence served a purpose. And indeed, when he ventured out again after bathing, he found Dylan in the quiet stillness of the night, calmly dispatching his own attackers. A silent duel of masters, each vying to maintain their carefully constructed facade. A master swordsman, his skills unmatched, yet forced to hide his true strength, playing the role of a pampered honorary knight, all to gain proximity to the seemingly innocent and unambitious 13th prince. Only Charlize, reborn with the knowledge of his past life, knew the depths of Dylan's cunning and ambition. Each aware of the other's hidden depths after the assassination attempts, both Charlize and Dylan braced themselves for the inevitable questioning. Yet, Dylan made no mention of the attack, continuing to play the part of a frail, naive boy. Watching the seemingly breathless youth beneath the tree, Charlize couldn't help but admire his performance. He had thought his own disguise impeccable, but Dylan's was truly masterful. If Charlize hadn't witnessed firsthand how Dylan, in their past life, had manipulated the royal family, his cold, ruthless climb to power, he might have been fooled by the prince's feigned innocence and kindness. And so, before the intended prey could take an interest in the hunter, Charlize found his curiosity piqued. Why did Dylan hide his true self? Crouching down, Charlize looked directly into Dylan's eyes, his gaze piercing the carefully crafted facade. Do you intend to live like this forever? How dreadfully dull. A flicker of confusion crossed Dylan's face, quickly replaced by a sharp wariness that Charlize instantly recognized. In the next instant, the boy feigned ignorance, pretending not to understand. Charlize didn't press the matter. His purpose was achieved. The prince, previously indifferent, had finally taken notice. Over the next few days, Dylan continued to observe him, yet their relationship remained stagnant. Charlize scoffed at his own predicament. Making someone like him wasn't usually a challenge. Take Mary, his maid, for example. He had easily turned her initial disdain into affection with minimal effort. Mary's opinion of him had completely changed. Dylan, however, was proving to be an exception. Beyond swordsmanship, Charlize wanted to teach the prince other things. He had requested the necessary materials a week ago, but they had yet to arrive. He would have to retrieve them from the library himself. In the eyes of others, Charlize was nothing more than a useless knight, elevated by his family's wealth. The fact that he was now the 13th prince's tutor was a source of much resentment. Behind his back, they mocked both him and Count Robert, a man known for his disdain for women, especially beautiful women lacking intellect. The books Charlize required were being withheld by Robert. It seemed a personal visit was necessary. The moment Charlize entered, Robert quickly covered something with a cloth. Charlize, ever perceptive, inquired if it was the book on imperial studies he had requested. The contempt in Robert's eyes provided the answer. He clearly believed that someone as ignorant as Charlize was unworthy of even touching the book, as if it were an insult to the very knowledge it contained. Faced with Robert's prejudiced madness, Charlize chose to respond with a display of his true capabilities. He calmly began to recite the book from memory. He had barely reached the second chapter when Robert interrupted him, stubbornly insisting that recitation didn't equate to understanding. How could Robert possibly know? Charlize, as royalty, having served the imperial family for 400 years, knew intimately every emperor's interpretation of the book. With utter confidence, Charlize invited him to ask his questions. Robert, still clinging to his narrow-minded assumptions, believed Charlize wouldn't be able to answer a single one. Instead, he was met with insights so incisive they pierced to the core of the matter. Where did his bravado go? Humiliated and enraged, Robert roared. Even if you teach the 13th prince these things, how could he possibly understand? His ultimate fate is still death. Even as she was belittled and scorned, Charlize responded with a smile. Hearing this, her entire demeanor shifted. Unleashing her suppressed power, she fixed Robert with a look of such disdain and menace that he felt a chilling fear. The words practically ground out from between her teeth. Are you unaware that careless words have consequences? I advise you to watch your tongue. We're a naked threat. He was, after all, speaking to the brilliant mind that had once controlled the empire's commerce and industry. Law, medicine, agriculture, architecture, economics. There was no field in which she wasn't proficient. Moreover, she had also achieved acclaim in painting, composition, and writing. Such a figure. Yet because of her mother's dying wish, she chose to live a life of quiet obscurity. Only after her death, through her manuscripts, did people discover that this legendary genius was the former 7th Prince, Dylan. Recalling the details of her past life, Charlize realized that many events weren't coincidental. They were all connected to the 7th Prince's wife. Whether it was the concubines who targeted the 7th Prince's wife or the 1st Prince who insulted her homeland, they all met grim ends. Only the 5th Prince, who had attended the 7th Prince's wife's funeral, had the last laugh, ascending to the throne. She hypothesized, if the 7th Prince's wife's dying wish hadn't been for him to live a modest and humble life, but instead to become emperor at all costs, or to destroy the empire if he couldn't have it, how different would the outcome have been? Looking out the window at the brilliant starry sky, Charlize pondered dispassionately. Her plan was flawless. She had painstakingly become the royal tutor, waiting for the day of the 7th Prince's wife's death. That would be the perfect opportunity to gain Dylan's favor. And that day was fast approaching. Suddenly, the elegant strains of piano music drifted to Charlize's ears. Listening intently, it seemed to be coming from Dylan's room. A playful impulse seized her. Keeping time with a melodious tune, she began to hum along. The music abruptly stopped. The sudden silence of the night made Charlize wonder if this approach was too hasty. The melody resuming the next second gave her the answer. This piece, Secret Greetings, described the composer's love at first sight for a goddess and his gradual descent into infatuation. Only later did he discover that the goddess was a spy who had approached him with ulterior motives. The next morning, they both tacitly agreed to pretend nothing had happened. At breakfast, Dylan informed Charlize that he would be visiting his mother that afternoon. Having been informed, Charlize naturally agreed, thinking that anything concerning the 7th Prince's wife made Dylan sensitive. No wonder he was so meticulously dressed today. Although she wanted to deepen their relationship, she couldn't be too impatient. Tentatively, she asked, "May I accompany you?" Looking at the boy, stunned by her request, Charlize was certain of rejection. Unexpectedly, it turned into a pleasant surprise. He agreed. At that moment, Charlize felt the thrill of finally catching a wildcat that had always tried to escape. Little did Dylan know, the smiling woman before him had ulterior motives. With a gentleness Charlize had never seen before, and a shy, almost bashful demeanor, he described his kind and gentle mother. Only when speaking of his mother did Dylan seem like a boy of his age. As the saying goes, a woman dresses up for the one who pleases her. Charlize hadn't bothered much for the person himself, but she put considerable effort into her appearance for his mother. The carefully chosen, elegant dress and the sapphires, the 7th Prince's wife's favorite, showed her meticulous planning. Even Dylan, who saw her every day, was momentarily stunned by her elaborate attire. Only when Charlize looked at him did he hastily turn away, concealing his reaction. They soon arrived at the 7th Prince's wife's palace. Looking at the magnificent estate and the opulent interior, Charlize truly understood the depth of Dylan's love for his mother. And when she saw the usually taciturn Dylan chattering away to the 7th Prince's wife about the weather and the flowers, she realized even more acutely the importance of the 7th Prince's wife to him. She glanced surreptitiously at the frail woman in the bed. Even in her weakened state, the vestiges of a once breathtaking beauty were apparent. An aura of elegance and warmth radiated from her. It was said she had been bedridden since Dylan's birth, poisoned and frail. Even though Charlize's approach was calculated, a pang of genuine sadness struck him at the thought of her impending death. He remembered from his past life that the seventh prince's wife perished in the autumn, her final days consumed by agonizing pain. Only muskroot could ease her suffering. But muskroot was a rare herb, reserved solely for the emperor. He couldn't possibly ask for it. He needed another way. Suddenly, Charlize's eyes lit up. He recalled the upcoming swordsmanship tournament. It was open to all, regardless of social standing. Merit alone determined victory. The prize? The emperor would grant the champion a single wish. If he won and obtained the muskroot for Dylan, Dylan would surely be indebted to him. Meanwhile, the casual conversation between mother and son drew to a close. The seventh prince's wife inquired about Charlize, who stood nearby. Dylan glanced towards the visibly nervous young woman, finally releasing his mother's hand. "This is my tutor," he introduced. Charlize stepped forward and bowed, introducing herself to the prince's wife. The seventh prince's wife smiled warmly, sighing. Dylan had, unknowingly to her, reached the age where he required a royal tutor. With the humility of any loving mother, she expressed her hope that the tutor would guide her often inadequate son. Charlize demurred, offering genuine praise for Dylan's exceptional qualities. Reassured, the prince's wife gestured for Charlize to come closer. Charlize hesitated for a moment before taking the frail hand offered to her, promising she wouldn't betray the woman's trust. Though thin, the seventh prince's wife's hand was surprisingly warm. The warmth radiated from her fingertips to Charlize's core, a searing, almost painful sensation. A heavy weight settled in his chest. This frail mother simply wanted her son to see her at her best. But such moments were fleeting. Dylan was only permitted brief visits with his mother, separated by long stretches of time. Leaving the seventh prince's wife's palace, Charlize watched Dylan's silent form ahead, pausing his own steps. He waited for Dylan to turn to seek him out, but Dylan's azure eyes held no question, only a quiet patience as he stood in place. Charlize sighed inwardly. He would ask nothing, as always. Only the thirsty dig for water, after all. With a small smile, he approached Dylan. He spoke plainly, confirming Dylan's assessment of his mother. The seventh prince's wife was indeed as kind and gentle as Dylan believed, a woman worthy of respect. In that moment, Dylan's heart stirred, bathed in sunlight. The young woman before him seemed to exude a captivating floral fragrance. Her deep eyes, like the night sky, held a mesmerizing allure, capturing his attention. Perhaps it was because she had perfectly inherited the Duchess's breathtaking beauty. That beauty, he knew, often drew the gaze of all who beheld her. But Dylan understood that his current fascination wasn't solely due to her appearance. Charlize felt unlike anyone he had ever met, like a rose with thorns, or more accurately, like a sword. After sincerely thanking Charlize for her words, Dylan began to open up. He admitted that he found her mysterious and had been observing her. He trailed off, leaving his thoughts unfinished. Charlize was entirely unsure what he meant to say, but this was the first time Dylan had expressed any opinion of her, so there must be a purpose behind it. Detesting riddles, Charlize spoke frankly, inviting Dylan to ask her anything he wished. The young prince seemed startled, a faint blush coloring his cheeks. He turned his head away, silent. Frustrated by the stalled progress, Charlize considered what she could reveal and took the initiative. Stepping closer to Dylan, she said, "Your Highness, while observing you, I've also placed great hope in you. From the moment you were entrusted to my care." Dylan simply stared, speechless, at the increasingly radiant young woman. Their first moment of genuine conversation ended abruptly. The phrase, "No, no, die," perfectly described the Empire's ninth prince. Instead of enjoying a life of pampered luxury, he insisted on making a spectacle of himself at the 13th prince's residence. Ignoring Dylan completely, the uninvited prince immediately addressed Charlize as a disgrace to the Roland family. However, upon seeing the legendary royal knight's stunning beauty, his eyes widened, and he spoke with a newfound lightness. He suggested that Charlize had likely secured her position as royal tutor based on her looks rather than skill, prompting a sharp retort. Charlize coolly suggested he examine her tutor application himself. This subtle rejection only seemed to embolden the ninth prince. He patted the empty space beside him with a frivolous air. "Charlize, come sit and have some tea." Charlize, who had been treated with courtesy by Dylan until now, felt a wave of revulsion. She maintained her composure, however, and glanced calmly at Dylan, whose expression remained neutral. She knew he wouldn't intervene, but it didn't matter. She knew this repulsive creature would eventually meet his demise in his pursuit of the throne. The Ninth Prince's loathsome voice droned on beneath her. I'm far superior to that wet-behind-the-ears brat. Why not become my knight? You seem to like swords. I could bestow upon you the title of Sword of the Ninth Prince. You know, there's a wise saying, those whom the gods wish to destroy, they first make mad. In her past life, it was the desire to become the Emperor's sword that had led Charlize down a ruinous path. The Ninth Prince's words dredged up those unpleasant memories. Her eyes, devoid of emotion, fixed on him, oblivious to the minefield he was treading. The Ninth Prince seemed to think this title was a rare honor for a female knight like Charlize. His words echoed those of the Emperor in her previous life. During those unbearable years, she had been stripped of all human dignity, treated as nothing more than an object to be used and discarded. Dark emotions threatened to erupt. Her voice, cold and sharp, cut through the air. Becoming a sword, Your Highness? Do you mean that sincerely? Have you ever even held a sword? The rapid-fire questions momentarily stunned the simple-minded prince. Before he could react, Charlize had reined in her dark emotions, replacing them with a pleasant smile. Her voice, gentle yet firm, rang out. I'm a member of the Roland family and the 13th prince's tutor. Even you, a prince, cannot insult me so. Furthermore, you have insulted my student. The Ninth Prince, who had been momentarily captivated by her smile, finally realized his misstep. Charlize's smile vanished, replaced by a sharp gaze as she formally requested a duel. Jingpeng, momentarily taken aback by her intensity, readily agreed to the challenge. After all, an honorary knight was still a knight. He was certain that Charlize was nothing more than a pretty, swordless ornament. The narrator certainly hoped he wouldn't be crying too hard tomorrow. The news of a duel between an honorary female knight and a prince's escort knight caused a stir. No one expected Charlize to win, including Dylan, who had remained silent until now. His quiet utterance of teacher was enough for Charlize to understand his concern. She returned his worried look with a reassuring smile. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many felt the duel was unfair. The Ninth Prince, having delegated the duel to his escort, preened at the side. Lady Ronan was the one who proposed the duel, he declared smugly. The crowd still felt it was unfair. No one believed the beauty had any chance against the beast. So, when Charlize effortlessly lifted the heavy sword from the weapon's rack, a collective gasp swept through the onlookers. Charlize's opponent remained unconcerned. Even when she offered him the first strike, he arrogantly assumed he could defeat her with a single blow. He intended to show mercy, but his swift attack betrayed no such gentleness. Charlize easily dodged the blow. Her expression remained impassive as she delivered a scathing remark. Is that all you've got? The taunt was the final straw, enraging the beast. As the man launched another attack, his teeth bared in a snarl. Everyone present could sense the killing intent radiating from his sword. Fear for Charlize rippled through the crowd. Surprisingly, Charlize remained motionless. She effortlessly parried the furious blow, the force of her counterattack sending the man stumbling back half a step. Even more shocking, Charlize's sword now held the small rubber band that had bound the man's top knot. His hair, now loose, further fueled his rage, and he lunged again. Charlize evaded the attack with a graceful leap, landing lightly. She began her counteroffensive. Her relentless assault left the man defenseless. Centuries of pent-up fury seemed to pour out with each strike of her sword. Though they could hear Kayla's pleas, they were ignored. This was no longer a duel. It was Charlize's catharsis. When she finally stopped, the dueling ground was stained crimson. A chilling silence descended, broken only by the whisper of the wind. Charlize's eyes, still blazing with killing intent, swept across the stands to the Ninth Prince. In that instant, he felt a profound terror. He's a monster, he thought. The outcome was clear. The man promptly knelt and conceded defeat. The referee, his hand trembling, raised it to signal Charlize's victory. The Ninth Prince, equally shaken, approached her and stammered an apology for his earlier rudeness. Charlize, still holding her sword, stood beside Dylan. I accept your apology, she said, each word a heavy weight upon the Ninth Prince's heart. As if granted a reprieve, he turned and fled without a backward glance, leaving even his guards behind. Charlize, now a name whispered with respect, had earned everyone's recognition. The disdain once held in secret transformed into open praise for the true knight she had proven to be. Watching Dylan dismiss his attendants, Charlize guessed he was about to ask her the secret of her remarkable swordsmanship. He did indeed have a question, but it was far from what she expected. "Why did you duel for my honor?" His clear blue eyes, stubborn and earnest, held her gaze. He stepped closer, his voice laced with bewilderment. Do you have another reason? And why did you say that the way I live is meaningless?" With each advancing step, Charlize felt a subtle pressure emanating from him. A moment later, a composed smile touched her lips. Taking the lead, she leaned close to Dylan's ear, whispering, "Because we're the same kind of people. That's why I understand you so well." Dylan acknowledged Charlize's skill with the sword, but he didn't believe they were alike. Charlize stepped back and began to dissect Dylan's carefully constructed persona. "You've always been confident in yourself. From childhood, you never doubted you would ascend to the throne. Your talent is your secret, one no one knows or cares about. You don't need anyone's approval. You meticulously plan everything, precisely mapping out your future." Dylan stared, astonished, at the girl who had so accurately analyzed him. Then she spoke of herself. "From a very young age, I knew I was exceptional, someone of inherent worth. Because I was so gifted, I longed for the ordinary life of a commoner." The similarity of their experiences began to shake Dylan's earlier denial. Could Charlize truly understand him? "It's easy to obtain anything you desire, but that breeds a sense of weariness," Charlize added, hitting the mark. "From an ordinary person's perspective, easily obtaining everything is fortunate. But for someone like us, it's different. I wondered if living like an ordinary person would be more interesting. So I hid my true abilities, disguised myself as one of them. But being surrounded by those who don't appreciate you is even more tedious." Dylan couldn't deny her soul-piercing analysis. He readily admitted it. Charlize continued, "It's precisely because we are the same that I fought for your honor." Her blunt words widened Dylan's eyes. Before he could react, Charlize leaned closer, her voice a near whisper, as intimate as a lover's murmur. "Whether you're wary of me or ignore me, I accept it. But you could also try letting down your guard. I think the latter is preferable." They were so close now, their breaths mingling. Dylan simply stared, speechless. In that moment, his defenses crumbled. Charlize knew that once Dylan lowered his guard, he developed a near-obsessive attachment to the other person, an attachment that would drive him to obtain what he desired, regardless of the cost. To conceal her identity and participate in the swordsmanship tournament, Charlize began to alter her appearance. She even bound her chest, but she still looked undeniably feminine. Just as she resolved to cut her long hair, the elves who frequently came for meals arrived to repay their kindness. They cast a spell, transforming her hair into a short, brown crop. Her eyelashes darkened, her knuckles thickened, and her voice deepened. She now had the appearance of a grown man. The method to reverse the spell was simply to extinguish the candles in the room. Before her rebirth, Charlize had never participated in the swordsmanship tournament. The Duke valued achievements from his sons far more than from a talented daughter. Each time, she could only remain in her room, cheering for her brothers from afar. Now, she stood here, ready to compete. The first round was a large-scale elimination. All participants entered a magical dungeon. The first 1,000 to escape would advance. While others feared encountering monsters, Charlize found the dungeon strangely beautiful. She advanced easily. However, she hadn't expected to face her older brother in the second round's one-on-one duels. A strong candidate for the Knight's Order, the exceptionally skilled swordsman, Alkin Rohan, the Duke's eldest son. The surrounding spectators were certain of Alkin's victory. The commentator, brimming with excitement, dramatically posed the question. Ronan's second son had been eliminated in the first round, so could the family's remaining contender win the match? Meanwhile, Charlize, also a servant in the Ronan household, felt a pang of irony. The match began. He stood motionless, waiting for Alkin to charge and engage. Parrying the blows was effortless. He could see right through his older brother's moves. Every action was textbook, predictable. Alkin struggled to keep up, forced to acknowledge his opponent's strength. Charlize knew his brother was strong, but so was he. If the tournament rules didn't forbid killing an opponent, Alkin would likely already be dead by his hand. A ripping sound echoed through the arena. Alkin's armor had been torn. The sudden eruption of murmurs from the crowd only deepened Alkin's frustration. His opponent was clearly not a noble, his swordsmanship unorthodox. Yet, despite his struggles, Alkin hadn't managed to land a single blow. By the time the clock ran out, neither had secured a victory. The judges declared a draw, advancing both competitors. Charlize knew that even though his brother was undefeated amongst the nobles, he had fallen from his pedestal. Back in the room provided by the tournament organizers, Charlize softly thanked his trusty sword for its service. He decided to take advantage of this opportunity outside the palace walls and explore the festivities. It was a time of celebration. The vibrant cries of vendors filled the air. He found a secluded spot and overheard a group placing bets on tomorrow's champion. Many still favored Alkin, even those who acknowledged Liz's strength after the draw, attributing it to Alkin holding back. Their arguments were quickly dismissed. Charlize shrugged, unfazed by their opinions. He didn't care what others thought. Then, unexpectedly, he spotted Dylan, who had yet to make his formal societal debut amongst the crowd. Dylan paused mid-drink. Before Charlize could look away, Dylan's sharp eyes met his. Anxiety flickered within him. Did Dylan recognize him? He had conveniently taken leave during the tournament. And Liz, whose name was strikingly similar to Charlize's, had emerged. After the seventh prince's wife acquired the Silroad herb, Dylan would surely learn the truth eventually. Dylan's gaze didn't linger, but Charlize still felt uneasy. It was best to leave. Unbeknownst to him, while everyone else bet on Alkin, Dylan had placed a wager of 100 million gold coins on Liz. Just yesterday, he had been a confident prodigy, a celebrated swordsmanship genius. Even with the draw, he couldn't deny the chasm of talent between himself and his opponent. Was he truly a genius? Alkin spiraled into self-doubt, his confidence shaken. He fought hesitantly in the semifinals, losing to another favored contender, Kahu. Kahu, Charlize's former fiancé. The man who, in his past life, had searched for him for 5 years after everyone else, even his own family, had given up. Memories flooded back. He found himself momentarily paralyzed. He knew he couldn't let emotions dictate his actions. He focused, gathering his strength for a final strike. He pulled back at the last moment. The crowd roared with applause. Everyone began to speculate. Where had this dark horse come from? The various knightly orders were already vying for his attention, eager to recruit him. Charlize walked towards the podium. He bowed to the man who had orchestrated his tragedy in his past life. Everyone waited with bated breath, wondering what he would request. A title? Wealth? Perhaps a grand celebration? To their disappointment, he requested that his reward remain confidential. After granting his request, the emperor extended an invitation for Liz to become his personal knight. Charlize declined the prestigious offer, citing his desire to remain anonymous. He knew the emperor would be scheming to control Liz, to keep him within the palace walls, just like the countless other test subjects from his past life. That is, if anyone could find Liz. With a flick of the wrist, he extinguished the candle and returned to being Charlize. Later that evening, he changed his clothes and attended the celebratory banquet held in honor of the tournament victor. He loathed such events, but all the princes and their tutors had been invited. He had to be there. Scanning the room, he spotted a secluded terrace. He planned to remain there until the banquet concluded, but he hadn't anticipated. Once again, she ran into Kahu, the young master of the Delman family. He stood at the doorway, hesitating whether to enter, worried his presence might be too conspicuous and spark rumors. Charlize invited him in. Unexpectedly, his first words were, "You're still alive?" It turned out that starting 2 years ago, he had become increasingly strange. He felt his body shrinking, and the events that surfaced in his mind were becoming reality one by one. He had searched through the records of all the prophets in history, but couldn't find anyone similar to himself. He suspected he was possessed by a demon, but what was puzzling was, not everything he envisioned came to pass, and the changes that did occur all revolved around Charlize. In his foreseen future, Charlize had disappeared, but now she was here, and he'd voiced his bewilderment. 2 probing questions in quick succession put Charlize on guard. She knew what Kahu wanted to hear, but if he knew about her disappearance, he must also be curious about the magic sword, Kira. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so eager to find her. Regardless of how much he knew, none of it had actually happened in this timeline. Denial was her best course. Charlize feigned complete ignorance of what Kahu was talking about, dismissing his questions as a strange joke. Only then did Kahu enter, apologizing and explaining that his earlier questions were merely a ploy to get her attention. After all, their two families were supposed to be united through marriage. Charlize remembered how compliant he used to be. If she hadn't disappeared, perhaps she would have become his wife, living a life of polite indifference. But she had to have her revenge. With a sharp, decisive tone, she refused. "I have no desire to be anyone's wife." Leaving him with a curt, "Please don't bother me any further," she quickly left. She couldn't drag Kahu into her life. After all, he was the only one who had searched for her after her disappearance, besides Dylan. She didn't want to involve anyone else. For the sake of her revenge, she had to let go of all Uganda Ganshing unrelated emotions, be it sympathy, fleeting feelings, or infatuation. Yet, when she heard about the seventh princess's relapse, Charlize felt an unbearable anguish. She clenched her hands tightly, reminding herself to wait until daybreak. Dylan had to witness the seventh princess's suffering firsthand. Only then could she exploit Dylan's deep gratitude. The long night finally passed. Dylan had a servant girl inform her that he couldn't attend her lesson today due to the seventh princess's condition. This was the moment Charlize had been waiting for, a legitimate reason to offer the Shilu grass. As his tutor, she should be by his side. Meanwhile, chaos reigned at the seventh princess's residence. The physicians had deliberated all night, but hadn't found a solution. So, when Dylan emerged, Charlize saw him looking haggard and exhausted. She stated directly that she had something to give him. As intelligent as he was, Dylan quickly guessed what Charlize had brought in such haste. But even though he had anticipated it, Dylan was still shocked when he saw the Shilu grass. Was this what you sought by winning the swordsmanship competition? Her silent acquiescence was confirmation enough. Dylan found Charlize increasingly unreadable. Why did she approach him? And why give him the Shilu grass? He didn't wait for her answer, but quickly left, instructing the servants to prepare the medicine for the seventh princess. In that brief interval, the seventh princess requested to see Charlize, the one who provided the Shilu grass. Her voice, faint as a whisper, was barely audible. Charlize had to lean in close to hear her. "My son, I entrust him to you, teacher." The princess's voice was soft, but her words were heavy, each one striking Charlize's heart like a blow, leaving her breathless. With mixed emotions, she agreed. Originally, she had done this to turn Dylan into a tyrant. She hadn't expected to inadvertently guide him down a righteous path. In her past life, the seventh princess had passed away while Dylan was still desperately searching for the Shilu grass. He hadn't been able to ease his mother's pain or give her a proper farewell. Guilt and self-reproach had tormented him his entire life. This time, Charlize had changed that. The seventh princess was free from pain, and Dylan remained by her side, accompanying her through her final moments. The funeral hall was eerily quiet. Fearful of the second princess's influence, no one dared to come. A week passed. Only Charlize remained, quietly accompanying Dylan. Once again, her attempts to persuade him to eat were unsuccessful. Then, she encountered the fifth prince, who had come to offer his condolences. In the previous timeline, the fifth prince had arrived on the final day. Looking at the grief etched on Dylan's face, Charlize was suddenly struck by the realization that Dylan was just a 14-year-old boy. This time, as someone deeply involved, Charlize truly understood the heavy weight of mourning alone. The oppressive atmosphere prompted her to step outside for some air. As she prepared to return to Dylan's side, a soft rain began to fall. She encountered the young prince, also caught in the downpour, searching for her. He handed her the seventh princess's will. Charlize's eyes widened silently. The contents had changed. In her past life, a single letter from her mother had been enough for her to abandon the throne and live a quiet life. But this time, with Charlize's influence, the will, once a plea for a humble and quiet existence, now urged, "Do what you want to do. Live freely in my stead." These words weren't just the seventh princess's advice to Dylan. They were also what Charlize longed to say to him. Dylan, still unsure of his own desires, asked, "You must have something you want to do, right?" Charlize's heart pounded in her chest. She carefully tucked the will away. With a knight's salute, dropping to one knee, she earnestly implored Dylan to become the emperor. She would be the first knight, the one to guide the empire's growth. Proper protocol called for a formal ceremony. The knight presenting their sword, the monarch placing their hand upon the kneeling knight's head and swearing an oath. But how could Dylan treat his teacher in such a formal manner? Instead, he knelt, took Charlize's hand, and pressed a reverent kiss to it. "Teacher," he murmured, "then please become mine. I have only you left." His pale, handsome face, washed clean by the rain, looked both sorrowful and vulnerable. From this moment forward, the power of choice, the weight of destiny, rested in Charlize's hands. Once the mourning period for the seventh princess had passed, Dylan finally asked Charlize what she desired. Having waited for this moment, Charlize whispered, a frantic edge to her voice, "To crush the world beneath my heel, to rule the empire, and then to destroy it." Charlize wasn't just asking Dylan to become a tyrant. She wanted him to destroy himself and his empire along with it. Faced with such a monstrous request, Dylan's expression remained placid, as if Charlize had merely decided what to have for dinner. He calmly confirmed, "Is this your wish?" Upon receiving her affirmation, he gave his own. "Then as you wish." She was the daughter of a noble duke, born to be cherished and pampered. Yet, her birth cost her father his beloved and her brothers their mother. They loathed her, ignored her, yet she desperately sought their approval. She believed that achieving greatness would earn their recognition. She became the empire's greatest swordsman, but instead of family acceptance, she was branded a demonic swordsman by the emperor. For 400 years, she was tormented by slaughter. Reborn, she no longer yearned for familial affection. Her heart held only vengeance. Her indifference startled them. They even questioned why she didn't greet them. But did they deserve it? A whole month passed after Charlize left for the palace before her father even noticed her absence. It was only because Charlize had always strived to create opportunities to see him. He summoned a servant to inquire about her well-being, and then realized he had never once called his daughter by her name. To him, Charlize was a word tinged with sorrow. It was the name his deceased wife had chosen. If she were still alive, they would surely be a happy family. But there were no ifs. Since Rachel's death in childbirth, their family had been fractured. His heart remained unmoved, a stagnant pool. Learning that Charlize would never return to the ducal estate evoked a flicker of something complex within him. Yet, whether she returned or not, what did it matter to him? Charlize's second brother, perplexed by her lack of response, believed he had always treated her well, as an older brother should. He was the only one who didn't treat her like she was invisible. Besides, this was the first time his family had expressed any concern for her. She should be overjoyed. He even presumptuously thought, "Charlize, don't cling to me just because of one concerned letter. I'm about to participate in the swordsmanship tournament. I don't have time to worry about her." Did his conscience not prick him as he uttered those words? Yet, even the day before the tournament, he hadn't received the anticipated reply. He consoled himself, convinced that Charlize simply hadn't realized the letter was from him. He was sorely mistaken. Charlize had not only read the letter, she had returned it. His imagined sister should have been moved to tears, excitedly asking him questions. Something was definitely wrong. At breakfast, he hesitated for a long moment before finally speaking. "Father, have you heard any news of Charlize?" He quickly lowered his head as if he'd done something wrong. As expected, his father flew into a rage. "Why bring up such an unpleasant topic at the table?" he roared. "How absurd. There was a place set for the deceased, but not for the living." The Duke looked at the empty place, setting, and realized something else. He had never eaten a meal with that child. The few times he'd seen Charlize seated at the table, he himself had refused to eat. Over time, Charlize had simply stopped coming to the dining hall. He quickly dismissed this ridiculous thought. From an unremarkable prince to today's crown prince investiture ceremony, Dylan had spent a full 4 years. Even more remarkable, the emperor had combined his coming-of-age ceremony with the investiture, pardoning criminals and rewarding newborn infants. It was a celebration for the entire empire. Everyone was praising the empire's virtuous and talented new crown prince. Equally envied was the genius tutor, Charlize, who, at only 20 years old, had risen to the position of crown prince's grand tutor. Even the other members of the Ronin family became the subject of fervent discussion, complimented for their foresight and excellent parenting of Charlize. However, judging by Duke Ronin's tightly controlled expression, the praise didn't seem to be all that pleasant. After all, Charlize's current achievements had nothing to do with them. Enduring the pleasantries with barely concealed anger. They finally found an opportunity to speak to Charlize near the end of the banquet. They opened with an accusation. What tricks did you use to get involved with the crown prince? But what did it matter to them? They claimed Charlize was a member of the Ronin family, yet none of them had ever treated her as such. This disrespectful attitude angered the Duke. His eldest son began to accuse Charlize of forcing them to take sides, making them the first family in the eyes of outsiders to support the crown prince's faction. Charlize refuted him impassively. Her becoming the Grand Tutor had nothing to do with the family. It just so happened that the prince she tutored ascended to the position of crown prince. The Duke interrupted their argument. He approached Charlize, his face contorted in a furious scowl, and warned her that she had better keep a low profile. He, too, would be happy if she had no connection to the Ronin family. Even his second son thought this was too much. After all, only he, having been rebuffed by her several times, understood that Charlize was no longer the little girl yearning for their acceptance. What they didn't expect was Charlize's even more decisive response. "I've been meaning to do the same," she said. "If you could remove me from the Ronin family registry, I would be eternally grateful." There was no trace of petulance in her words. Her elegant composure and nonchalant tone stunned the three men. The blonde second brother quickly intervened, assuming Charlize intended to be adopted into another family. He tried to placate her, saying, "No other family can compare to the Ronins." The implication was clear. Without the Ronin family, she wouldn't survive. Charlize's expression turned sardonic. "Is that so? I've never enjoyed any special treatment from the Ronin family, so I wouldn't know. But I imagine anywhere else would be considerably better." Thankfully, the arrival of the attending servants broke the tense conversation. Before departing, Charlize pointedly emphasized her desire to be officially removed from the family registry as soon as possible. She was more eager for it than they were. She was his teacher and his salvation from a life of fear. Feelings he couldn't express could only be buried deep within his heart. He desperately wanted to become an adult capable of fulfilling his teacher's wishes. Whatever those wishes might be, he would make them come true. Even if her teachings encouraged him to discriminate based on birthright and to approach problems with violence. Even if they instilled in him doubt about the empire and resentment towards the royal family. It was like staining a blank sheet of paper with ink, spreading darkness across its surface. He accepted it all without question, because, to him, his teacher's words were absolute truth. For years had passed, now the crown prince. He remained deeply respectful toward Charlize. The only change was perhaps the unconcealable adoration in his eyes when she smiled. Dylan suddenly reached out and brushed a smudge from the corner of Charlize's lips. The scene mirrored one from Charlize's memory for years prior. Back then, he hadn't been asleep. She clearly remembered the young boy who had reached out to brush a flower petal from her face, only to pull his hand back. This time, he didn't retract his hand. Could it be that their relationship was about to take a new turn? The touch of cool fingers against the softness of her lips sent a ripple of unexpected emotion through Charlize. A strange mix of anticipation and nervousness coiled in her stomach until Dylan, finally removing the smudge, broke the charged silence. It was then that the realization struck her. Dylan had truly become a man. Shedding their formal attire, they began their celebratory dinner, marking Dylan's ascension to crown prince. To commemorate the occasion, Charlize offered to grant him 3 wishes. Dylan, feigning a need for careful consideration, readily listed them all. His first wish was for a pardon from Charlize, a preemptive forgiveness for any future transgression. Charlize, unable to imagine Dylan committing any significant offense, readily agreed. Her easy compliance, however, sent a blush creeping up Dylan's neck. "Ah, youth," she mused, "what thoughts occupy your mind?" His second wish was for Charlize to name the knightly order he commanded. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had handpicked its members herself, a collection of promising swordsmen and resourceful individuals who would prove useful in the future. She had trained and assembled them as a gift for him. Holding Charlize in high regard, Dylan had already chosen a name, Artainek, meaning shadow. Charlize, of course, had no idea that the name she had casually suggested over tea would one day resonate throughout the entire continent. For his final wish, Dylan hesitated, a deep blush coloring his cheeks as he avoided her gaze. After much stammering, the seemingly weighty request was revealed. He wished to hear Charlize sing. Charlize was puzzled by his shyness over such a simple plea. Parting her lips, she began to hum the melody of The Thorny Rose, the same song Dylan had played for her that fateful night. "Please don't discover my secret," she sang. "Let me be your only one, for only I understand you." To her surprise, Dylan joined in, softly humming the rarely heard chorus. "Please don't run away," he sang, his voice a low murmur. "I will treat you well. Come to me. Look at me. Thorns or poison, even my life, I'm willing to bear it all, just to have you." Charlize stared at him, captivated. Even his singing voice was perfect. As their voices blended on the final, poignant line, "Just to have you," Charlize finally offered her congratulations. Then, with a knowing look, she added, "If you ascend to the throne." Dylan waited with bated breath for her to finish, but she left the sentence hanging. "If I had a little sister, I would protect her." These were the words of a young Dante, speaking to his mother years ago. He had envied other children who had younger sisters to call their own and longed for one himself. Yet, he had never protected her. Meanwhile, Duke Ronan, upon receiving the formal request for Charlize's removal from the family registry, was furious. That Charlize had dared to send the application, stamped with the royal seal, was a clear message. The decision was no longer in their hands. The Duke, who had never intended to grant the request, dismissed it as a childish whim. He always craved our love, he thought, seemingly oblivious to his own role in Charlize's pain. "That old fool is truly wicked," Dante muttered under his breath. "You know he's serious, don't you?" he pointed out, his voice barely a whisper as he observed his family's indifferent expressions. He received 2 icy glares in response. "Haven't we been too cold to him?" Dante pressed, his voice gaining a sliver of courage. "Isn't he just acting out?" The three began to discuss solutions. Dante suggested they try to appease him, to soothe his wounded heart. He was abruptly cut off by Art's dismissive scoff. Appease him? Clearly, he saw no need for such measures. He confidently assured Duke Ronan that he would handle Charlize, his tone suggesting either diplomacy or force. Dante, alarmed, quickly interjected, forcing him might backfire. Aiken's chilling reply sent a shiver down his spine. "Who said I would force him? I will respect his decision." Left alone, Dante felt helpless. He could only hope his brother wouldn't escalate the situation. He, too, didn't want his sister to leave, the sister he had longed for as a child. Memories of her death, long suppressed, resurfaced, flooding him with guilt. He had to stop his eldest brother. But Aiken, with his long strides, had already reached the Crown Prince's residence. He was stopped by a servant, informed that the Crown Prince's tutor was currently giving a lesson. Even invoking his status as Charlize's brother and the future heir of House Ronan failed to sway the servant. The reason given was simple. Charlize had declared herself removed from the family. Ignoring the servant's protests, Aiken barged in. He couldn't fathom how a mere 20-year-old Charlize could possess any remarkable skills. He settled in, prepared to be amused. However, even a simple practice session revealed the exceptional swordsmanship of both individuals. As Charlize sparred, she offered Dylan sharp critiques and precise instructions for improvement. Her talent and prowess were undeniable, a stark revelation to Aiken. They had made a grave mistake. Charlize was far too skilled to be merely a tutor. She deserved a brighter stage. Yet, they had suppressed her potential since childhood. Before the lesson concluded, Aiken quietly retreated. Watching Charlize today had brought back memories of Liz, the frail, yet exceptionally gifted boy from 4 years ago. If Charlize had been nurtured properly, perhaps she too could have achieved greatness. But regrets were useless. No amount of remorse could undo the past. Now, a highly sought-after tutor, Charlize declined most invitations. Yet, she accepted one, an invitation from Lady Lemia of House Hall. In Charlize's eyes, Lemia was the ideal candidate for Crown Princess. Furthermore, Dylan's recent attentiveness had become somewhat overwhelming, applying hand cream to her chapped hands, offering to wash her feet on Teacher's Day. His gestures, though well-intentioned, were becoming excessive. His relentless efforts were starting to wear on her. But he needed to keep Dylan at arm's length. He needed to find him a crown princess who would be the greatest possible asset. Lemia, worthy of her noble birth, a true child of privilege, was beautiful, flamboyant, elegant, and confident. Upon their first meeting, her ambition was blatant. Presented with both autumn crocus and snapdragon, she chose the snapdragon to brew into tea. Both are sometimes called skullflower. The former's meaning is greed and desire. The latter signifies that the best time has already passed. It was a clear message to Charlize. Her happy times with the crown prince were over. She shouldn't be greedy. She should leave quickly. Lemia's transparent expression, unable to hide her scheming, struck Charlize as almost endearing. He admired her boldness, unfazed by her thinly veiled insult. He responded to Lemia with orchids, flowers symbolizing a noble woman. And so, they reached an understanding. He would help her secure the position. But were they certain they didn't need to ask the person most involved for his opinion? When Dylan saw the information about Lemia on Charlize's desk and heard him plainly state that she was the ideal candidate for Crown Princess, Dylan nearly stumbled, his breath catching in his throat. He could scarcely believe it, asking in disbelief, "You want me to marry Lemia?" The affirmative answer came, delivered with a disconcerting calmness. Charlize wondered, was Dylan dissatisfied? Dylan took Charlize's hand, his expression serious. "Let me ask you again," he said. "Do you want me to marry her?" The light touch against his palm reminded Charlize of their first meeting. He had brushed his hand against hers in just the same way. Charlize swiftly withdrew his hand. "Yes," he answered firmly. "I want you to marry her." In that instant, Dylan looked like a small, abandoned puppy. He thought to himself, with bitter irony, so it's true then. What Charlize didn't see, after Dylan left, was the terrifying darkness that momentarily consumed the young prince's face. The next day, Lemia tearfully and desperately begged to be released from the prospect of becoming crown princess. Her reason? She already had a lover, a commoner, to whom she had given her heart and body. Without him, she claimed she couldn't live. Looking at Lemia, now completely devoid of her previous arrogance and confidence, Charlize couldn't help but think it was all a charade. He pressed her, asking, "Do you understand what it means to be the crown princess?" Something in his words seemed to strike a nerve. Lemia trembled harder, her voice rising to a shrill pitch. I'm not worthy of being crown princess. I deceive the crown by hiding the fact that I have a lover. I only beg for mercy." Charlize crouched down, looking at Lemia, who was now a weeping mess. Had he misjudged her? She had seemed so ambitious before. He wouldn't force her, of course. But the familiar ring of her excuse brought to mind a young lady from his past life who had pursued Dylan. She, too, had suddenly left to study abroad, gotten married, and settled down, never to return. An unsettling thought crossed Charlize's mind. Could Dylan have had a hand in this? His darkly cunning, almost unhinged, little wolf dog of a prince would offer Charlize the world, but he wouldn't marry another at his behest. And so, the woman who had dreamt of being crown princess just the day before was now on her knees, tearfully begging Charlize to let her withdraw, crying out that she was unworthy. Charlize, believing he had misread her, felt a pang of guilt. Dylan, the architect of this drama, remained impassive, expressing only concern for Lemia. Faced with Charlize's silence, Dylan suddenly asked if Charlize would swear an oath. An oath that no matter what he did in the future, Charlize would remain by his side. Though puzzled, Charlize agreed. He trusted the king he had molded with his own hands, implicitly. In return, Dylan lowered his noble head, gently took Charlize's hand, and kissed it reverently. He then vowed that he would launch a rebellion this winter, seize power, and lay the empire at Charlize's feet. This meant that the future of the empire, whether it thrived or fell to ruin, rested solely on Charlize's shoulders. In the quiet of the night, the sound of hushed, intimate panting hung in the air. The red mark on the man's lips hinted that they hadn't been merely running. Slightly pulling away, Dylan whispered a name he longed to say but hadn't dared to utter, murmuring his grievances. Charlize pulled him into a tight embrace, and Dylan's heart began to race. He gasped, bolting upright. It had all been a dream. The darkness of a night solidified Dylan's resolve. He would do anything for Charlize, even become a tyrant, cursed and reviled by history. He was willing, as long as he could remain by his side, possessing each other completely, undisturbed by anyone. Meanwhile, the heroine of his dreams was busy gathering intelligence about the rebellion. His unerring marksmanship earned him a piece of information, a rumor that a rare treasure was hidden in a cave within the Line Mountains. Charlize knew that the area belonged to Duke Kane, a man who supported no royal and held considerable military power. And the only thing worthy of being called a Western treasure would be Duke Kane's long-lost heirloom. This information was incredibly valuable. Since Dylan hadn't married the crown princess, he lacked the political foundation provided by powerful in-laws. To launch an uprising, he would need the support of other influential figures. If they could help retrieve the heirloom, they could gain Duke Kane's allegiance. As a child, Charlize would happily read fairy tales with Dante. She would take cute little steps, pitter-pattering over to her brother, blinking her innocent white eyes, and ask where she could find a special carrot. But Charlize was cruelly pushed away. She fell and injured her leg, unsure of what she had done wrong, and could only whimper pathetically, calling out for her brother. Dante's face softened with remorse, but he caught sight of his father and older brother watching them coldly from a distance. He could only silently pray, "Charlize, don't come any closer, don't come any closer." But little Charlize, despite the pain, stood up and continued running towards her brother. He had pushed her. She must have done something wrong. She ran, her voice choked with tears, crying out, "Brother!" Her apology was met with another harsh shove from Dante, his voice sharp. "Didn't I tell you to stay away?" The memory ended with Charlize sitting alone on the grass, utterly forlorn. The figure grew increasingly hazy. Ever since Charlize had submitted her request for removal from the family registry, Dante woke every night from these memories, his gaunt frame and dark circles under his eyes testament to his inner turmoil and guilt. Listlessly, he walked to the study and heard his father scolding his eldest brother, Aiken. "You've been behaving poorly lately, haven't you? As the eldest son, you must set an example for your younger siblings." He knew the words were meant for him as well. After all, he had received a warning from the academy. Both brothers remained dejectedly silent. Finally, the Duke revealed the topic of the family meeting. "They haven't reported Charlize's expulsion. Does that mean the matter has been resolved? Can we burn that expulsion request?" Aiken's answer was a firm no. Even though the Duke was already seething with anger, Aiken continued, "If Father had shown Charlize even a sliver of concern, she wouldn't be like this now." This blunt confrontation was unexpected, but even more shocking was his brother's continued audacity. "It's time you let go of the past and accept Mother's death. Treat Charlize properly." His words were met with a furious slap from the Duke. "How dare you speak to me like that? Telling me to let go of the past? Someone who showed me just as little concern has no right to say such things." Aiken, his cheek rapidly swelling, lowered his gaze. His expression remained calm, his voice even as he replied, "But I am your child, and you are my father. Everything I do, I learned from you." Surprisingly, although the Duke was still furious, he didn't say another word and left the study alone. Aiken, dabbing at the corner of his mouth with a handkerchief, resolved to win Charlize back, no matter the cost. The Crown Prince's investiture ball was just a few days away. They would seize this opportunity. Her birthday was also approaching. Giving her a gift at the ball seemed like a good idea. Expensive gifts were easy to acquire, but lacked sincerity. Girls like flowers. Black roses would be perfect for Charlize. Together, they made this delightful decision. The captivating melody and their perfectly synchronized steps drew even more attention to the already striking pair. Everyone remarked on how well suited they were, and rumors of their impending engagement began to spread. Charlize, unable to refuse the first dance due to etiquette, only wanted this dance with her former fiancé to end quickly. She couldn't explain it, but a shiver ran down her spine. Perhaps if she looked up, she would see Dylan's face, dark enough to curdle milk. Dylan was bothered that his teacher's first dance wasn't with him. Noble ladies usually dance their first dance with a knight escorting them. He had only been gone for a moment, and someone had already beaten him to it. As the song ended, Dylan swiftly crossed the room and possessively wrapped an arm around Charlize's waist. "Charlize," he began, and it was the first time he had ever used her name. "I need to speak with you." She had a hunch Dylan was showing off, but to whom? The room erupted in a cacophony of whispers, everyone speculating about the reason behind Dylan's bold move. The most popular theory was that Charlize had stumbled, and Dylan, ever the chivalrous prince, had simply steadied her. Praises of the Crown Prince's inherent goodness and upstanding character began to circulate. Only Keiho, who had just danced with him, knew the truth. The Crown Prince was a predator with sheathed claws. The current royal family was vastly different from the one she knew in the future. If Charlize hadn't intervened, the fifth prince, not Dylan, would be the heir. It was to unravel this mystery that she had asked Charlize for a dance. Meanwhile, Dylan, wanting to speak with Charlize, earnestly apologized for touching her without permission and for using her name. Before Charlize could respond, Dylan, flustered, blurted out something about his earlier granted wishes. Charlize was amused. Was this what he considered a transgression? As far as she was concerned, the future ruler of the kingdom could call her by her name whenever he pleased. Dylan, however, insisted on maintaining a respectful distance, claiming he held her in too high esteem. Though Charlize felt such formality was unnecessary, she indulged him, a hint of fondness in her expression as she accepted his apology. She simply didn't understand why he had suddenly used her name. Because, for a long time now, I've wanted to say your name, Dylan confessed, leaving the second part of his thought unspoken. And I want to hear you say mine. Charlize realized she had been blinded by jealousy and possessiveness. The feeling was unfamiliar, but one thing was certain. She was happy because he was happy. And when she saw him with other men, a deep unease settled within her. As if seeking reassurance, he pleaded, "Teacher, even just once, could you call me Dylan?" Looking at Dylan, his face flushed crimson, Charlize asked, "Is this another one of your wishes?" He vehemently denied it, the lie evident in his tone. Charlize, the pragmatic warrior, didn't call him Dylan. Unlike the ageless magic sword she once was, human life was fleeting. She had to cherish the time she had. She had to remember her purpose within the royal family. The night view from the terrace was beautiful. The familiar setting triggered a hazy memory from her time as the magic sword. Her brother, Dante, had hired Keiho to find her when she had disappeared. He hadn't used her name, nor had he called her sister. He had referred to her only as Keiho's fiancée, offering the Ice City under House Ronin's control as payment. His only demand was that Keiho find her. As the night deepened, Charlize didn't dwell on the implications of that conversation. She just wanted to escape the boisterous ballroom. She hadn't gotten far when a jarring voice stopped her. "Charlize, do you realize your birthday is coming up?" The moment the words left his mouth, Aiken realized his mistake. Charlize's birthday was also the anniversary of their mother's death. Charlize looked at him coldly. "Are you calling me a murderer?" She reiterated that her removal from the family registry meant they were no longer related. To accuse the crown prince's tutor of murder was slander. Seeing the hostility radiating from Charlize, they realized she had misunderstood. They hastily explained they only wanted to celebrate her birthday and had even brought a gift. When Charlize remained impassive, Aiken nervously thrust a bouquet of black roses into her arms. They only saw the shimmering beauty of the black roses, each bloom sparkling as if dusted with priceless diamonds. They didn't know that, for Charlize, these dark flowers were poison. The moment she touched them, a wave of nausea washed over her. She coughed up blood, her body swaying, as she confronted the men, their faces beaming with misplaced satisfaction. "Are you trying to kill me?" The sudden turn of events filled the men with alarm. They rushed to her side, their voices frantic with concern. But Charlize coldly pushed them away. The sensation was familiar. She had experienced it once before, as a child. She forced herself upright, the world a dizzying blur. She thought she could manage to stay conscious with her saintly powers, at least for a little while. Then, through her hazy vision and the swaying world, she saw Dylan, and then she collapsed. If it was him, she could entrust herself to him completely. The Crown Prince Dylan, known for his composure, lost his countenance for the first time in public. His eyes widened in terror as he caught the collapsing Charlize, desperately trying to discern what was wrong. A dreadful suspicion surfaced, draining the color from his face. Could it be black rose allergy? A rare and potentially fatal allergic reaction. If the anaphylaxis was severe enough, it could even lead to death. He raised a hand, silencing the rising panic around him, including Aiken, who was rushing towards them with a black rose in hand. The unspoken words died on Aiken's lips. Seeing the flower only confirmed Dylan's fears. He couldn't reveal Charlize's weakness. Feigning concern, he excused Charlize's collapse as mere exhaustion from overwork and carried him away. Back at the Duke's mansion, Aiken and Dante questioned Charlize's nanny. They finally learned the truth. Charlize's magic was completely incompatible with the essence of black roses. And as a swordsman, his condition was even more dire. Unknown to them, the magic rings within Charlize had already shifted from red to transparent, signifying the rapid spread of the pollen and a far graver situation than they could imagine. Aiken, racked with guilt, demanded to know why the nanny hadn't spoken up sooner. The nanny glanced at the Duke sitting beside them, her face a mask of resentment. It was the Duke who had forbidden her to mention it. When Charlize was a child, a similar incident with black roses had left him unconscious. The Duke's response had been chillingly indifferent. He'd claimed the murderer of his mother had no right to cry out in pain, and he wanted to hear nothing more about him. Charlize had pulled through on his own. The Duke, remembering the past, seemed to age 10 years in that instant. He murmured, "No, he won't die." And indeed, he wouldn't. His reborn self was far too strong. Meanwhile, Dylan had dismissed the servants, intending to merge his own magic with Charlize's, the only way he knew to save him. But before he could act, he realized with astonishment that Charlize's magic was already merging with the poison. Charlize hadn't entrusted him with his rescue. He had entrusted him with his life. Rejecting the help of others, he had chosen Dylan as his protector. Dylan's heart melted. He took Charlize's hand, gently kissing it and whispering his name. "Charlize, Charlize, I will give everything to fulfill your wishes." Charlize was an emotionless revenge machine. After 3 days of unconsciousness, the first thing he did upon waking was request a leave of absence to pursue his schemes. Dylan's tireless care had earned him only a flicker of gratitude. When Charlize requested a half-month leave, Dylan, barely settled, nearly jumped up again, worried about his health. Though Charlize claimed it was to rest in the Line Mountains, the astute crown prince suspected another motive. Charlize never rested. The last time he'd taken leave, it was to retrieve the Siloath grass. What was it this time? Dylan not only granted the leave, but thoughtfully inquired if Charlize needed anything else. Even when the request included a warrant, he didn't question it. Charlize, surprised by his compliance, asked if he wasn't even curious about its purpose. Dylan's response was one of complete trust. Even though Charlize stubbornly kept their relationship within the confines of master and servant, the feeling of being trusted was intoxicating. As planned, Charlize soon arrived at Duke Kane's mansion. Securing the Duke's support was a crucial step in his rebellion. They exchanged polite pleasantries, each trying to decipher the other's intentions. Charlize didn't reveal his purpose, but instead indulged the Duke and his most brilliant strategist in a few games. His unbroken string of victories proved to them that the Crown Prince's tutor wasn't just clever. He possessed the wisdom and experience that came only with time. Finally convinced, Duke Kane spoke frankly. He didn't believe Charlize had come simply for a few games. He just didn't realize how high the stakes truly were. The wager, whether Charlize could find the family heirloom. The winner would gain control of the loser's abilities, influence, and fate for 14 days. Duke Kane didn't refuse. No matter the outcome, he stood to gain. Victory meant acquiring the Crown Prince's influence. Defeat meant the return of his heirloom. Only in his eyes, Charlize was going to her death. So many mercenaries had gone on this mission and never returned. The attendants who came with her shared the same thought and tried to dissuade Charlize from going alone. But they all failed. Clearly, they couldn't have predicted that Charlize would slaughter the monsters as easily as chopping vegetables. She even seemed to relish the carnage, killing to her heart's content. On the 10th day, she found the heirloom according to the map without any trouble. At this point, Charlize was completely unaware that a man with long blonde hair and a wide-brimmed hat had been following her the entire time. He was astonished by her fighting prowess. But even more puzzling was the fact that the demonic energy left behind by the monsters didn't seem to affect her at all. After the death of the creator, Eshelrite, his body transformed into Eshelrite fragments. These fragments contained the power of life force, which led to the birth of the monsters. Ordinary people would be corroded by the evil demonic energy. For someone like Charlize to be unaffected, she must have reached a realm unattainable by ordinary people. Or, while Charlize was out causing trouble, her devoted Dylan obediently stayed home, counting the days, waiting for her return. He was secretly preparing a birthday party for Charlize. Meanwhile, members of the Ronan family repeatedly pleaded with Dylan not to approve Charlize's application. Even the maids who relayed the messages were exasperated. But Dylan remained indifferent, refusing their requests. That is Master's right, Dylan thought. Besides, knowing Master as I do, even if I persuaded him, he wouldn't change his mind. People only realize their mistakes when they lose something precious. Rejected once again, the three men of the Ronan family finally understood what it meant to be powerless despite their best intentions. Duke Ronan was consumed by deep regret. Why had he treated her that way? Meanwhile, just when Duke Kane had given up hope of Charlize's return, she appeared, heirloom in hand, nonchalantly reminding Duke Kane to keep his promise. Thus began a swearing-in ceremony, with Charlize bringing Dylan along. Duke Kane presented his sword. Charlize returned the gesture as a noble. The oath complete, the alliance was formed. Charlize couldn't wait to return to the Imperial Palace. She wanted to see him as soon as possible, to give him Duke Kane's oath of allegiance. Surely this would repay his trust in her. So, when Charlize arrived back at the Crown Prince's residence without a moment's delay, she found Dylan directing the servants in decorating the mansion. It was a full year earlier than planned. The image Maid Mary had conjured in her mind of Charlize being surprised and touched was shattered. However, Dylan was still overjoyed. He got to see his master a day earlier than expected. Charlize looked around, even though she had guessed from the lavish decorations. When she heard Dylan admit that it was a surprise party for her, her icy heart was instantly enveloped in warmth. She, who had always considered her birthday a day of mourning, was truly happy. Back in her room, Charlize was still admiring the red roses scattered around the elegant space when Dylan entered, carrying hot water. He shyly asked Charlize to sit down, removed her shoes, and began to wash and massage her feet, weary from a day's journey. As he washed her feet, he chattered on, urging her to be careful and not get hurt. Charlize understood. Dylan was undoubtedly worried about her venturing alone into the dangerous Line Mountains. But Charlize was far from understanding just how important she was to Dylan. She was his only belonging. Only with her did he have a home. On her birthday, the dangerously beautiful Charlize held the dagger conjured from the gem, gesturing how she would personally kill the Emperor. She loved Dylan's gift, but she was even more excited about the game she would play soon. Dylan, faced with Charlize's declaration of wanting to kill his father, didn't object in the slightest. He noticed that Charlize never addressed the Emperor as Your Majesty. This gave him a strange feeling. His master had a secret she wasn't telling him, but it didn't matter, because no matter what, he would help her achieve her desires. He only wished for his master's world to be filled with light. For this, he was willing to change. Inside a dimly lit prison cell, the blood-splattered informant desperately defended his actions of selling information. He claimed he did it for the sake of the Empire's peace. He then revealed information about Charlize. He hadn't even sold the information that the Crown Prince was also involved, because he only wanted to eliminate the villains who were trying to destroy the Crown Prince. The painter of the mural was dead, his head separated from his body. Dylan, splattered with blood, remained impassive. If the man had simply sold information, Dylan might have spared his family. But now they would all die. He would hunt them down one by one, each death a slow and agonizing spectacle, a testament to the rebellion that was now burning bright. The final plan was confirmed. Dylan would take charge of the inner city, while Charlize would command the outer forces, cutting off any reinforcements. Charlize stressed the importance of securing the royal secret library before pursuing the Emperor. The records within, she claimed, held vital information for their uprising. Dylan's curiosity deepened. The library was strictly for royal eyes only. How could Charlize know its contents? Regardless, he would bring the Emperor to his knees. The day before the uprising arrived swiftly. It was the anniversary of the 7th Imperial Consort's death. They went together to pay their respects. Standing before the grave, his back to Charlize, Dylan asked, "Didn't you once say you would call my name someday?" Looking at his desolate figure, Charlize realized that if Dylan became Emperor, no one would dare address him so casually again. Softly, she spoke his name, Dylan. He didn't move, only whispered, "Could you say it again?" Confused, but compliant, Charlize repeated his name. Only then did Dylan turn, his eyes filled with the shadowed darkness he had kept suppressed. Charlize understood, but sentiment was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had to remain focused, clinging to her hatred and fury. Tomorrow, this boy, as pure and blank as a sheet of paper, would become a usurper, a tyrant. This was a coup d'etat known only to them. That night, Charlize met with Duke Kane and breached the Imperial City. Dylan, as planned, infiltrated the royal secret library. Inside, those reading the records could scarcely believe their eyes. The royal family, supposedly leading the nation, had orchestrated countless vile acts. Drug trafficking, human experimentation, the depths of their depravity were staggering. A blue-bound book caught Dylan's attention. Project Kyla, the Living Sword. It proclaimed, originating from the Magic Tower. It detailed how ingesting ashylite shards could transform a person into a monster. But those with pure hearts and unwavering wills would become sentient swords. The book's contents mirrored a story his teacher had once told him. The difference was that his teacher had mentioned a successful case. Recalling his teacher's subtle expression during that lesson, a suspicion bloomed. He quickly scanned the list of experimental subjects. There it was, Charlize Ronan, his teacher's name. At that moment, outside the Imperial City, scouts reported that the Ronan family was marching towards them. Charlize assumed they were coming to protect the Emperor, but no one would stand in her way. Then, in a heart-stopping moment, she saw it. The approaching troops were all flying the red banners of the rebellion. Upon hearing of the Crown Prince's rebellion, the Ronan family had feared the consequences of its failure. As the Crown Prince's tutor, Charlize would be executed. When Aigen declared the Ronan family's support for Charlize, her suspicions were confirmed. They could have remained neutral. Charlize wouldn't have implicated them. While their support was helpful, she didn't need it. The tense atmosphere was shattered by the release of 1,000 monsters from the Imperial Knights. Each creature required several knights to kill. The onlookers believed the city was doomed. So, when Charlize declared her intention to confront them, Duke Ronan vehemently protested. But Charlize responded with action, her astonishing combat prowess leaving a trail of slain monsters in her wake. "Retreat is not in my vocabulary," she roared, invigorating her troops. She would handle the monsters. The soldiers would continue to hold back the reinforcements. Charlize had waited a lifetime for this moment. Throughout her journey, she had fought to maintain her resolve, suppressing grief and guilt. She had used Dylan as a pawn in her game of revenge, all to witness the Emperor brought low before her. As the battle subsided, Charlize gazed upon the inferno, the screams of the dying filling the air. She released her bound hair, the long-suppressed exhaustion and doubt finally giving way to a chilling calm. She waited for Dylan to deliver the Emperor to her. Dylan had indeed captured the Emperor, but he didn't intend to follow the plan. He knew that killing the Emperor and destroying the royal family was Charlize's obsession. If the obsession disappeared, his teacher would disappear too. He still didn't understand how to love. Was it accepting everything for her happiness? But his teacher had taught him to obtain what he desired by any means necessary. Even if it meant defying her wishes, incurring her hatred, he was willing. His sword swung toward Charlize, who, having waited in vain for Dylan, had sensed something amiss and was now cursing his tardiness. She raced towards the Imperial City on horseback. So fast was her pace that her horse's hooves lagged behind. She ran on foot. The raging fire and scattered corpses proclaimed the fall of the royal family. But she felt no joy. What had Dylan slipped from her control? She ran into the burning palace. In a room untouched by the flames, she found Dylan, sword in hand, standing over the Emperor's silent form. A furious rage erupted within her. The Emperor should have died by her hand. She wanted to witness his death with her own eyes. "Did you kill the Emperor?" she demanded, her voice thick with murderous intent. Dylan chuckled, denying it. He had intended to kill him, but to prevent Charlize from abandoning her purpose in life, he had devised a better plan. He had fed the Emperor a shard of a highlight. No matter how cruelly Charlize treated him, he wouldn't die. Or, if she wished, she could forge him into a sword. The inhuman suggestion stunned even Charlize into silence. The creation of life was not a realm for mortals to meddle in. Even in her thirst for revenge, she hadn't wanted the Emperor to become a cursed sword like herself. Forging a person into a weapon was truly abhorrent. For a moment, she felt the urge to flee. But, regaining her composure, she realized that Dylan had done exactly what she had desired, toppled the royal family and her wretched father, the Emperor, all for her sake. He even wore an expression that begged for praise. A startled Charlize reached out and stroked Dylan's hair. "Well done," she commended him. Perhaps Dylan feeding the Emperor the highlight shard and turning him into a Kyra was merely a coincidence. Originally, his plan had been to expose the Emperor's crimes publicly. He had intended for the entire royal family to be judged before the people. But now, Dylan's brutality had complicated matters. People would only see them as usurpers. Dylan had grown too powerful too quickly. This feeling of losing control left her weary. If she were to run, the elves would help her, wouldn't they? The royal family was already being systematically rebuilt. Charlize should have been celebrating with Dylan, sharing a victory drink. Yet, she hadn't even attended his coronation. She was so distraught, unsure how to face the Dylan who had become a stranger. After all, she was the one who had stained a blank page with ink. Ultimately, it was her fault. Having made up her mind, she began to meticulously prepare herself, sending a servant to inform Dylan that she was ready. When Charlize appeared, clad in a sensual, elegant white dress, even the moonlight seemed to dim in comparison. Dylan, captivated, invited her to sit. The few days apart had created a subtle distance between them. Charlize suggested a game of truth, where one would ask a question and the other had to answer within a minute. The loser would have to grant the winner a wish. In the first round, they questioned each other about the highlight shards. Charlize answered that they were the source of monsters. Dylan believed that those who consumed the shards held no value. Charlize calmly replied that she hadn't. After all, she hadn't deliberately concealed the matter of the time loop. Charlize's question was whether Dylan had someone he loved. The young man blushed, his eyes filled with affection as he admitted it. He had fallen in love with that person long ago. Charlize understood. The person Dylan spoke of was her. She had only asked to test him, yet the confirmation only fueled her confusion. When Dylan asked Charlize the same question, the image of Cain flashed through her mind. But his feelings for Dylan were merely gratitude for the protection offered. He denied the question with the same answer. Dylan, upon receiving this answer, panicked when Charlize countered by asking about the identity of his beloved. He had a premonition that revealing the truth would lead to his teacher's rejection. Yet, he couldn't bring himself to lie. So he conceded, watching as Dylan, flustered, spilled his wine. Charlize understood that Dylan's feelings were genuine. This meant he would have to readjust his plans, even exploiting Dylan's affections if necessary. As long as it served his revenge against the Empire, nothing was off limits. Money was useless without the life to spend it. Even after the client tripled the commission, the guild leader remained resolute. He flatly refused the assassination contract on the Imperial tutor. Even he, a seasoned killer, couldn't match the chilling intensity in Charlize's eyes. The memory of being utterly dominated sent shivers down his spine. Not only could he not accept this contract, but any commission even remotely connected to Charlize was untouchable. Even the Ronin family, with whom he had severed ties, was off limits. Meanwhile, the day after dining with Dylan, Charlize moved into the Emperor's chambers, the same palace where he had lived for 400 years as Kayla. And the room Dylan had assigned him? The Emperor's own quarters, a chamber secretly connected to every other room in the palace. Architecturally, he was the fortress, metaphorically, the heart. This demonstrated the extent of Dylan's regard for him. Charlize was pleased with the lilac-themed room. His only request was for the maids to place the piano beside his bed. Ah, what a clever ploy. He knew he'd win that wager. Having Dylan teach him piano, it wasn't that simple. That evening, Dylan arrived to fulfill his promise. He held Charlize's hand, meticulously correcting his posture, betraying no hint of ulterior motives. Yet, the closer he was, the more enigmatic he became. Dylan had once been an open book, but since the 7th Imperial Consort's death, he had become unreadable. It seemed he would need more time to observe. His revised plan would have to unfold gradually. After Dylan's ascension, remnants of the old Emperor's loyalists still plotted a restoration. This time, they were colluding with the underworld. This changed things in Charlize's eyes. He had previously tolerated the criminal element, seeing them as a minor impediment to the Empire's progress. Now, he could use the purge of the underworld to uncover the Magic Tower, a place deeply connected to him, and search for clues about Kayla. He volunteered to handle the matter himself. An earl voiced his dissent, but Charlize silenced him with a chilling glare. Seeing no further objections, Dylan nodded, granting Charlize his request. However, another supporter of Charlize argued that it was too dangerous for the imperial tutor to go alone. Although Charlize needed no protection, Cain, recently promoted to captain of the First Royal Knights, stepped forward, offering to assist the imperial tutor. Charlize had intended to keep his distance, yet their paths continued to intertwine. The suggestion that Dylan should arrange a marriage between his beloved and another was utterly preposterous. The ministers debated endlessly, weighing the pros and cons. For the sake of political stability, a marriage between the Cain family, whose loyalties were uncertain, and the imperial tutor, Charlize, seemed the perfect solution. Dylan sat upon the throne, lost in thought. A tinge of melancholy colored his blue eyes. He imagined the two of them growing closer as they worked together. He remained confident, however, that in Charlize's heart, he, Dylan, held a more significant place than Cain. Yet, a flicker of doubt arose. After all, in Charlize's eyes, one was a former fiancé, the other merely a student. Their perspectives were vastly different. Dylan told himself to relax, to remain calm, lest he lose his mind. He had always known one thing. Excessive sentimentality would never win Charlize's favor, and what he desired was possession, or rather, complete ownership. Meanwhile, the two subjects of this discussion had already eradicated the high-level monsters unleashed by the underworld. Finding it difficult to track the enemy's movements, Cain glanced at Charlize, who was observing the fight. After their close encounter, Cain realized that Charlize was completely different from the Charlize he'd foreseen. The Charlize of his visions had been a noble lady desperately craving the love of her family, a knight brimming with untapped potential. But the woman before him now was like a honed blade, possessing a sharp beauty that danced between life and death. They say animals can recognize kind souls. His dog adored Charlize. Therefore, she couldn't possibly be as cold and heartless as she appeared. A gentle breeze carried the scent of lavender from Charlize's person, weaving its way into Cain's heart. Touched by the moment, he invited Charlize to his home to rest. It wasn't far from the Delman estate. Charlize considered that Cain, like herself, might have experienced time regression. This would be a good opportunity to observe him up close. She accepted his invitation. News that the young master of the Delman dukedom had brought a woman home for the first time sent the household into a frenzy. As they bustled about preparing to receive her, the servants couldn't resist gossiping. Is she the young master's fiancée? Not yet, but it won't be long. Cain apologized, his face flushed with embarrassment. Even he could hear the whispers, let alone the sharp-eared Charlize. Fortunately, she didn't seem to mind. This was the first meal Charlize had eaten outside the palace since her return. Not even the Ronin family had ever offered her such hospitality. The clearly thoughtfully prepared, lavish dinner, and the respectful servants conveyed a deep sense of sincerity. And when Charlize helped a maid who had slipped, her reputation within the Delman household soared. They all hoped she would become the true mistress of the estate. Back in her room, Charlize's first act was to inform Dylan that she would be staying at Cain's house for the night. Surely Dylan wouldn't be jealous. After all, she and Cain weren't sharing a room. She underestimated the young wolf's capacity for jealousy. White knuckles gripping a crumpled letter betrayed the turmoil within its recipient. To improve work efficiency, I will be resting at the Delman estate. Was this another test? Or did she truly have feelings for Cain? His lovesick mind wasn't entirely wrong. His worry was justified. A man and a woman alone together at night, things could happen. Charlize had just finished dealing with assassins who'd caught wind of her presence when Cain appeared with a lamp. They found themselves drawn together, gazing up at the star-studded sky. The beautiful moment felt almost unreal to Cain. The heir to the Hart family. It seems he died in a tragic riding accident. Cain's sudden words put Charlize instantly on alert. That event had occurred before her rebirth. Because she had changed the course of so many events, the heir had been spared. Was this a test, or was his memory faulty? Charlize feigned ignorance, causing Cain to flounder, quickly explaining that his memory was often unreliable. Now Charlize was certain. Cain, like her, had returned from the past. She had achieved this miracle through the highlight shard within her and by praying to the gods. But But how had Cain returned? Could it also be by the design of the god of fate? Charlize quickly dismissed that notion. Cain possessed no highlight shard. He was merely human. She shifted to another question. Why did you choose Dylan's side in the rebellion? Why didn't you inform the former emperor? I didn't choose his majesty. From the very beginning, I chose you. The gentle answer, coupled with the sincerity in his emerald eyes, gave Charlize pause. The genius imperial tutor, severing love, intending to use the monarch's affection for his own destructive ends. In his past life, he had been forced to become the royal family's demonic sword, slaughtering for 400 years, building the legacies of generations of emperors. All of it built upon his suffering. After orchestrating the crown prince's usurpation, he had gone to the territory of the underworld, colluding with the remnants of the former emperor's loyalists. He was shocked to discover that even without the royal family, Project Kairos would continue unimpeded, driven by the magic tower. Suddenly, Charlize sensed someone behind her. Without hesitation, she swung her sword. The newcomer was none other than the mage who had aided her in slaying the demonic creatures during the previous palace coup. Although the mage, Eastmao, raised his hands in a gesture of peace, Charlize's ice-blue eyes remained frigid. The sharp blade in Charlize's hand pressed mercilessly against the man's throat. He demanded to know the man's purpose in repeatedly approaching him. Only then did the man fearfully confess his desire to invite Charlize to collaborate. Charlize was clearly dissatisfied with this answer. He had explicitly stated his distrust of all magicians. Kill all magicians, the man blurted out desperately. He claimed to loathe magicians as much as Charlize, his sole purpose being their eradication. These words successfully spared his life. Seizing the moment of Charlize's hesitation, he began to spill his secrets like tumbling beans. The man's name was Payne, a member of the secret organization Affilio. Like Charlize, they were also investigating Project Kairos. The addition of the powerful Charlize would greatly expedite their efforts. Fearful of Charlize's disbelief, Payne revealed the distinctive mark of the organization on his wrist. Charlize, of course, knew of this organization. Their goal was the resurrection of a highlight. However, in his past life, they had achieved no notable success. Charlize, his interest waning, suddenly became alert when Payne mentioned a unique scent emanating from him. Payne, it turned out, was also one of Project Kairos's experimental subjects. That explained why he could detect the distinct highlight fragrance on Charlize. However, his modified body was essentially that of a living corpse, sustained only by magic. Having discerned this, Charlize swiftly sheathed his sword. It wasn't pity that stayed his hand, but the sheer waste of killing him. Even with Payne's bait of numerous top-secret revelations, Charlize turned and left without a backward glance. He couldn't deny that Affilio possessed many unknown secrets, but the condition for joining was also widely known. Becoming a member meant severing all ties with everyone he knew. He couldn't leave Dylan yet. Furthermore, he didn't have time to resurrect a dead Dylan, usurp the throne, only to hand his beloved over to someone else. The words he'd spoken unconsciously had conjured an image of his teacher and Cain exchanging knowing smiles. This only served to highlight his subconscious anxieties. Thankfully, his attendant informed him of Charlize's return from his mission with Cain. His gloomy mood instantly brightened. He hurried to the courtyard, only to find Charlize admiring the flowers, dressed in clothes he'd never seen before. Even though Charlize outshone the blossoms, Dylan's joy remained subdued. There was only one explanation. The clothes were a gift from the Harmon family, given at the bottom of Lake Cahul the previous day. He wanted to tear the garments to shreds. Suppressing the jealousy and possessiveness he shouldn't feel, he stopped at a distance. It was Charlize who noticed him first. Their reunion, after a long absence, was filled with seemingly casual greetings that masked a subtle exchange of probes. Charlize told Dylan how much he had enjoyed his outing, pointedly emphasizing his seamless cooperation with Cain. Yet, he didn't see the reaction he'd hoped for. Dylan even wore an indulgent expression. He announced his intention to hold a celebratory ball to commemorate the successful purge, with Cain and Charlize as the guests of honor. Did Dylan not care at all? The thought made Charlize's heart sink. Dylan reached out and took Charlize's hand. As if engaging in casual conversation between friends, he asked Charlize if he liked Cain. The young duke considered this seriously. He didn't dislike Cain, at least, but the answer he gave was a firm, "I like him." Dylan's grip on Charlize's hand tightened, a slight crack appearing in his perfect facade. Yet in the next second, he was composed once more, even praising it as a good thing. Despite the cool autumn air, Charlize suddenly felt a summer's heat. What do you think that is? Tell me in the comments section. Meanwhile, Kane, having just returned to his post, was intercepted by Alkin, who was eager for news of his younger sister. After exchanging pleasantries, Alkin hesitantly inquired about their expedition. He'd heard they'd single-handedly eliminated all the monsters. Kane, without hesitation, gave Charlize full credit. He even marveled aloud, wondering who could have trained such an exceptional talent. Alkin fell silent for a moment. No one had trained Charlize. He had mastered swordsmanship entirely on his own. He couldn't even confirm whether Charlize had ever received instruction from other tutors in any other subjects. This reminded Kane of the rumors circulating in high society. The Ronin family had only provided Charlize with basic etiquette lessons. Beyond that, they hadn't employed any tutors. A startled Kane took his leave, his mind buzzing with new questions. Charlize's swordsmanship could be self-taught, Kane mused, but what about the vast knowledge she possessed beyond that? He pondered, the Empire vastly different for what he remembered. Compared to before, it was now steeped in bloodshed. And the true ruler of the Empire was Charlize, the tutor to whom Dylan showed absolute obedience. How much of this was Charlize's doing? What kind of empire was she trying to build? A sense of unease, a premonition of the Empire's downfall, settled upon him. Charlize, dressed in an elegant white gown, seemed to shimmer like silk, her beauty breathtaking. All she needed was a piece of jewelry to complete the look. When a maid presented a pair of sapphire earrings and an emerald necklace for her to choose from, it brought two people to Kane's mind. A knowing smile played on his lips as Charlize made her selection. That evening, Charlize, veiled and on Kane's arm, made her entrance to the ball held in their honor. The room instantly buzzed with excitement. Their coordinating red attire amplified their already striking presence, capturing everyone's attention. Perhaps it was because he hadn't attended a ball in so long, but the attention made Kane slightly nervous. Excusing himself to fetch a drink, he momentarily escaped the spotlight. At that moment, Dylan arrived at the ball and made a beeline for the now momentarily isolated Charlize. "Teacher," Dylan said, "I've come to reclaim the first dance you stole from me." Startled by the suddenness of his presence and the hand at her waist, Charlize searched her distant memories. It was then she recalled the dance Kane had intercepted. Dylan gazed at her intensely, his hand gently caressing her face through the veil. "Please," he pleaded, his voice a sensual murmur, "don't look at Kane tonight. I want her eyes on me. Just me." His handsome, chiseled features and captivating tone had Charlize mesmerized. It was Kane who had broken the unspoken rule, she reasoned. Granting Dylan's request seemed harmless enough, even if the decision gave her the unsettling feeling of falling into a trap. She agreed, drawn in despite her reservations. As they danced, their movements a perfect symphony of black and white, Charlize couldn't help but wonder how Dylan danced so well. She hadn't taught him. This time, Dylan didn't shy away from the question. "Perhaps," he answered, "it's because I've been practicing alone for a long time, just to dance with you." The onlookers murmured their appreciation. This wasn't just dancing, it was a visual masterpiece. Even Kane, relegated to the role of spectator, had to admit the pair was dazzling. They looked like the true stars of the ball. But the Emperor's tailcoat was identical to the one he'd had Madame Cole make for him. And the seamstress, who had crafted his clothes for 10 years, had suddenly refused to make him any more. Perhaps it was a coincidence. Yet, as their eyes met, the intensity in Dylan's gaze made Kane suspect he had deliberately stolen the Imperial tutor's attention. Though the thought bordered on treason, he couldn't shake the feeling. "Staying at my estate for one night allowed me to understand her more deeply," Kane declared. "Therefore, I intend to marry her." "Kane, were you even aware of what you were saying?" He was openly provoking the Emperor. The veins bulging on Dylan's hands confirmed Kane's suspicions. Charlize was indeed the Emperor's weakness. In truth, Kane had no real intention of marrying Charlize. He merely wanted to gauge the Emperor's true feelings. His suspicions confirmed, Kane grew even more curious. Why was Dylan, who had been so indifferent before crossing over, now so fixated on Charlize? Pressing further, Kane mentioned he had received intelligence about the rebels. He would inform Charlize after confirming it, and then go to provide support. This was a blatant declaration to Dylan that he was about to collaborate with Charlize for a second time. Dylan dropped the pretense, his handsome face darkening. "Your loyalty is commendable, young Duke," Dylan said, his voice laced with a thinly veiled threat. "But I advise you to tread carefully. A servant's duty is to understand his master's intentions without needing explanation." He slowly drew his sword, admiring it. Dylan was clearly aware of Kane's probing, but it was a foolish decision. Those who drew too much attention inevitably paid the price. Kane, silenced and suppressed, finally realized with a start. Dylan's casual, yet overwhelmingly intimidating demeanor was strikingly reminiscent of Charlize. Dylan was issuing a warning, veiled in an air of chilling elegance. The moment Dylan departed, a hazy memory from before Kane's transmigration sharpened into unexpected clarity. He had met the 13th prince in his past life. Back then, his mother had respectfully addressed Dylan, not the emperor, as Your Majesty, and had attempted to introduce Kane as his advisor. But Dylan had refused, his rejection devoid of pretense. Kane had sensed a genuine lack of emotion in his expression. Leaving the palace, Kane had wanted to ask why the emperor still reigned while another was called Your Majesty. His mother, however, had sternly instructed him to forget everything he had seen and heard, to pretend he had never encountered Dylan at all. Kane never saw the enigmatic prince again, not until his own death. Only then, through his diaries, did people learn of Dylan's influence on the royal family. The most discussed topic was Dylan's control over the imperial power. The fifth prince had been the only one to offer condolences upon the death of Dylan's mother, and thus he became the ultimate victor, ascending to the throne. Yet, after years of ruling the empire as Dietrich II, he realized a chilling truth. The most formidable person isn't one who leaks secrets for personal gain, nor one without weaknesses, but one who desires nothing. Dylan was precisely such a man. He heard the fear in Dietrich II's words, but offered no comfort, for he knew Dietrich II had already resolved to kill him. That very night, Dylan was attacked. Yet, it was Dietrich II who perished the following day. The fifth prince, forever wanting to repay Dylan for his mother's condolences, attended Dietrich II's funeral. Even from this, one could see Dylan's apathy and lack of desire. Was this his obsession? Was it genuine? Or was it orchestrated by Charlize? Not only these changes, but even Kira, the magic sword used by the royal family to conquer the continent, had not appeared. Yet, Kane felt he had seen the sword after his transmigration. He, an orphaned mercenary, had been rescued by the imperial tutor and directly appointed captain of the emperor's exclusive night order. A life destined for hardship had catapulted him into the upper echelons, attending balls as a knight. So, as Charlize was relieved to avoid the dilemma of whether or not to eliminate Kane, her gaze fell upon Hugo, strikingly conspicuous amidst the crowd. Looking at the boy she had taken in, now so handsome and imposing, Charlize felt a surge of maternal pride. After showering him with unreserved praise, she inquired about the reason for his presence at the ball. Hugo fell silent, his gaze lowered. He didn't want to trouble the imperial tutor. As if sensing his thoughts, Charlize firmly lifted his chin. "Whatever it is," she assured him, "I can help you resolve it." Flushing, the young man hesitantly revealed his purpose. After Charlize had dismantled the criminal underworld's operations, the kidnapped and trafficked children were left with nowhere to go. Hugo had stepped forward to care for these children, who shared his own past. However, finding accommodation for them remained a problem. In Charlize's eyes, this was a trivial matter. With a beckoning gesture, her shadow guard materialized, awaiting her command. She instructed them to summon the nobles for a meeting. The haughty nobles, one moment swirling in the elegance of the ball, the next found themselves obediently seated in the council chamber, discussing the welfare of orphans with Charlize. Charlize's proposal not only addressed Hugo's concerns, providing shelter for the children, but also mandated professional psychological counseling and education for those traumatized. Throughout the proceedings, the nobles cooperated fully. Hugo was incredulous. The imperial tutor wielded such power and influence. That evening, Dylan, upon learning of the matter, made a single request: to accompany Charlize on the day the orphanage opened. Charlize had no reason to refuse. Dylan's presence would undoubtedly encourage further donations. Though she still harbored a desire for revenge against the royal family, she found herself softening towards Dylan. Could she be developing feelings for him? Big brother, big sister. A small child with a lisp asked innocently, looking up at the handsome pair, "Are you lovers?" A blush crept up both their faces. Dylan, stunned by the unexpected sweetness, froze. Charlize, ever composed, recovered first. Smiling down at the little girl, she asked, "Do we look like lovers?" Startled by the beautiful woman's sudden closeness, the child shyly covered her gap-toothed smile. Then, with a decisive nod, she mumbled an affirmation. The usually aloof emperor not only bestowed a sweet, but also gently stroked the girl's head, praising her cuteness, seemingly unfazed by the child's sudden forward approach. Observing this rare display of tenderness, Charlize felt a warmth bloom in her chest. So he did like children. But another child, more than this little girl, drew his attention. A lone figure sat drawing under a tree. Charlize approached the solitary little girl with a gentle inquiry. It turned out the other children avoided her, finding her strange pronouncements unsettling. Having explained, the girl retreated back in her own world. For a moment, only the soft whisper of falling snow filled the air. To break the silence, Charlize introduced herself, but she was taken aback by the child's abrupt response. "Sister, you smell of elves and blood." Could it be? Was she, too, a subject of the Kyla Project, gifted with special abilities, sensitive enough to perceive the lingering scent of blood on Charlize, a subtle testament to her swordsmanship? But how could this child know of elves? The next question, sharp and piercing, cut straight to Charlize's core. "Sister, are you human?" Charlize faltered, then answered with gentle firmness, "Little one, I have always been human." The words felt like both an answer and a quiet affirmation to herself. Yes, even stripped of her flesh, forged into a living blade, her humanity remained. Even if the world denied her, she would hold on to that truth. The little girl seemed unconcerned with the answer. At the sound of the headmaster's call, she ran off. Charlize watched the innocent child disappear with a tender gaze. Unexpectedly, she noticed Dylan, still beaming, standing behind the other children. The truth, so long evaded, finally solidified within her. No matter how much she yearned for vengeance against the royal family, she couldn't bear to see Dylan hurt. She had developed feelings for him. The new year also marked Dylan's 20th birthday. Charlize marveled at the passage of time. 6 years she had been by his side. Dylan, however, dismissed the significance of time. He believed, with unwavering certainty, that they would remain together always, just as he had promised years ago. No matter what Charlize did, he would stay by her side. Their easy intimacy, a bond impenetrable to outsiders, did not go unnoticed. From a distance, Kane observed them. In his previous life, these two had shared no such closeness, not even a passing acquaintance. These diverging paths, juxtaposed against the joyous laughter of the orphans, filled Kane with a growing sense of foreboding, a premonition of impending doom. He couldn't pinpoint the source of this unsettling intuition, but he felt compelled to avert the looming disaster. After Dylan departed, Kane called out to Charlize, the epicenter of this altered reality. He told her plainly that he was retracting his earlier promise. He had vowed not to pry into her secrets during the rebellion, as long as she remained silent. Now he rescinded that vow. Unflinchingly, he revealed his premonition of a future without her, a future where dish it, I ruled. He confessed that Charlize's decisive actions, her ruthlessness, reminded him of a dying candle burning its brightest before being extinguished. He explained that the new emperor's reign, far from being enlightened, was shrouded in darkness and control. He had to understand. He had to unravel the mystery of Charlize, the reason for the empire's transformation, and his own role in this unfolding drama. Before Charlize could respond to his apology, the bells of the new year chimed. Their conversation ended by unspoken agreement, with a simple exchange of Happy New Year. Kane was certain now. Charlize, too, was a traveler from the future. Her exceptional swordsmanship mirrored that of the young man named Li Ji he had encountered 4 years prior. Back then, they were not yet betrothed. The swordsmanship tournament must have been their first meeting. But Li Ji's deliberate restraint, his clear recognition of Kane, could only mean one thing. He remembered him from their past lives. A little girl's words, "Sister, you smell of sprites," finally sparked Charlize's curiosity. Calling out to the air, the sprites materialized. They quickly confirmed the girl's observation, but when Charlize asked why they were so friendly toward her, the sprites became noticeably nervous. They began to avoid the question, busily asking Charlize if she had summoned them for a good night's sleep. Charlize, who hadn't slept well in a long time, readily agreed. However, she knew she would have to investigate the reason for their evasiveness on her own. Sprite dust wasn't just good for sleep. It also had the ability to let one see the past in their dreams. As soon as Charlize closed her eyes, she saw the scene of the fifth prince, Dietrich II, ascending the throne. It turned out that Dylan had seen her on that day. As the magic sword, Kira, the moment Dylan laid eyes on her, he was bewitched. But before he could touch the blade, Dylan woke up. He marveled at the truth behind the legends of the magic sword, yet remained unmoved by its allure, turning away without a second glance. When Charlize opened her eyes again, the sun was already high in the sky. She hadn't slept so soundly in ages. The sprites truly were capable of anything, even helping her recover lost memories in her dreams. Comparing the dream with reality, she could confirm that Dylan hadn't time traveled, nor was he aware of her own journey through time. A gentle breeze stirred, opening the curtained window and letting in a flood of sunlight. Charlize declined the servant's offer to close the window. She had spent too long as Kira, displayed in a dark, airless chamber. At breakfast, Dylan suggested that after the deregistration process was complete, Charlize should take a new surname. He then proposed to bestow a noble title upon her. He had already prepared everything. All she had to do was agree. Charlize, somewhat curious, asked what title he had in mind. The answer was unexpected, yet understandable. At the very least, a duke. This response softened Charlize's gaze even further. For an imperial tutor, a marquis was already a high honor, yet Dylan wanted to grant her a dukedom. However, she refused without a moment's hesitation. Her answer was just as Dylan had anticipated. Charlize wanted nothing to do with the Empire. But it didn't matter. After he overturned the board and destroyed everything, he would leave with her. "If I may, do you intend to keep me all to yourself?" Charlize's blunt words caused Dylan to lower his gaze, neither confirming nor denying. Just looking at his teacher made his thoughts race. He longed to lose himself with her, but that was a choice he could never make. He countered, "Can I even have you?" He considered it a miracle that Charlize remained by his side. He didn't dare hope for the same freedom his mother had, the freedom to live as she pleased and to claim someone entirely. Meanwhile, Kane, determined to uncover the reason behind Charlize's desire to overthrow the Empire, personally visited the Ronin ducal estate. He was sorely disappointed. When he inquired about Charlize's preferences, they could only offer guesses. Perhaps she liked swordsmanship and disliked flowers. But Charlize always looked happy when smelling flowers. Their entire memory of her childhood consisted of her staying in her room all day, rarely seen. This made Kane deeply skeptical. His question, "Are you truly Charlize's family?" silenced the Ronin men present. Having gained nothing, he decided to approach Charlize directly. He found his opportunity during a subsequent council meeting. After Charlize volunteered to investigate the connection between the magic tower and the underworld, Kane, ignoring Dylan's death glare, requested to assist her, just as he had before. That night, as they investigated together, Kane was once again astonished by Charlize's abilities. He had nearly lost his life trying to investigate the magic tower's influence within the underworld, yet had learned nothing. Charlize, however, with a single whistle, summoned Lucy, the infamous head of the Assassin's Guild, to inquire about the situation. Lucy owed Charlize a life debt. It turned out that the people from the magic tower were in the area, searching for Alfonso. As for why they were searching for Alfonso, who studied the highlight population, Lucy didn't know. Only under Charlize's emotionless stare did he immediately change his tune. Originally, he hadn't planned to investigate further due to the danger. However, Charlize was clearly more terrifying than any peril he faced. After Lucy left, Charlize requested to act alone. Even Lucy, who lived a life constantly flirting with danger, wanted to back out, proving the sheer risk of this operation. But Kane refused. The moment he'd asked to understand her, he'd already prepared to face whatever came. Before Charlize could react, a cacophony of noise interrupted them. They say that before death, memories flash before one's eyes like a revolving lantern. But as Charlize held a sword to Kane's throat, he felt no fear. Instead, He wanted to defend her. He believed she had her reasons. Moments ago, members of the Magic Tower had appeared. Hidden in the shadows, the two of them overheard shocking news. They were trying to sway the royal family to further the Kira project. Having lived through this once before, Kane knew that the magic sword Kira, which appeared after Charlize's disappearance in his previous life, didn't exist yet. So, could there be a connection between the magic sword Kira and Charlize? Before his sharp mind could explore this thought further, Charlize's hand tightened around his neck, her killing intent palpable. "I'm only following you to prevent the Empire's destruction," he choked out. "So, I'll pretend I didn't hear the mage's conversation. They're here for Alfonso. Nothing more." The tense atmosphere instantly dissipated with his words. Charlize smoothly sheathed her sword. "Good to know," she stated coldly. Kane blushed uncontrollably. He thought his eyes must be deceiving him. Even now, he found Charlize breathtakingly beautiful. Elsewhere, Alphonse, reeling from Kane's accusations and reprimands, drank himself into oblivion. When he went to see his son, Dylan, his wife informed him that the boy was already asleep. Her smile radiated a maternal glow he'd once seen in his own mother. Clutching at this lifeline, he frantically asked his wife if giving birth to Dylan had been painful, frightening. Did she hate Dylan? After all, she had nearly died during childbirth. Watching his frantic demeanor, his wife understood. After Gideontine, her husband was breaking down too. As he swayed, desperate for an answer, demanding to know if she hated their child, she slapped him hard across the face. Tears welled in her eyes as she demanded how he could even think such a thing. He knew about the Ronin family, and she had always believed it was an accident. She never imagined they would blame a child for their mother's death. Tears streamed down her face. As a mother, even though she had almost died, she had never resented her child. She would have willingly given her life. Children are born carrying their parents' hopes and love. The thought of her own child subjected to such treatment from the Ronin family cut her to the core. She believed Alphonse, now a father himself, would understand. Alphonse dredged up a deliberately blurred memory from his childhood. He saw his mother refusing the option of a safer, but potentially less impactful birth. He thought his mother must have loved Charlize to give up her chance at survival. Standing outside the door, Duke Ronin also remembered his wife's anticipation during her pregnancy. If it was a girl, they would name her Charlize, meaning happiness. If a boy, Shane, meaning son. They simply wanted their child to be happy and achieve great things. Charlize wasn't worried about Kane knowing that Kira was a forged magic sword. The idea of forging a person into a magic sword was too unbelievable. It would be difficult for him to investigate further. Compared to Kane, she was more concerned about being discovered by Dylan, the dangerous man who had, without changing expression, made his father swallow a fragment of a highlight. Yet, even so, she couldn't draw her sword against Dylan as she had against Kane. Since Dylan's ascension, he had been pushing forward according to his own vision. Under his rule, the Empire's political and economic landscape had flourished, reminiscent of its golden age. Even if he declared war, the citizens would eagerly respond. But they didn't know that what awaited them was defeat and death. Ultimately, the Empire would slowly crumble. Watching Dylan eloquently discuss his war plans, Charlize had to admit their flawless design. After all, Dylan murmured, a flicker of pride in his eyes, before I returned, conquering these two territories took 200 years. I truly am the most exceptional emperor. You're truly exceptional, teacher. The unrestrained praise sent Dylan's heart racing. The sweetness of her words sparked a flurry of thoughts. How could he further capture his teacher's attention? Showing weakness always seemed to draw her focus. Perhaps feigning illness, even collapsing dramatically, would elicit her concern. Or maybe pretending exhaustion and leaning against her shoulder would be better. He dismissed each idea in turn. A calm, direct confession felt like the most appropriate course of action. The setting sun bathed them in a warm glow as they stood facing each other, imbuing Dylan's confession with a potent energy. Teacher, he began, his gaze locked on hers, I love you. In this charged atmosphere, surely Charlize would understand his heartfelt declaration. But the radiant woman before him responded with a casual air, leaving Dylan crestfallen. Was she feigning ignorance? Or did she truly believe he couldn't possibly harbor such feelings for her? Unfortunately for Dylan, his timing was disastrous. Just as he poured out his heart, Charlize spotted the sprites, who had reappeared after their previous vanishing act. Distracted, she likely hadn't fully registered his words. And so, the heartbroken young emperor found himself invited for a stroll in the garden. "I'll say it again," Dylan declared, cupping Charlize's face in his hands as snowflakes danced around them. "I love you." His bold and fervent "I love you" carried a heat that seemed to melt the winter air. The earlier, more subdued confession had barely registered with Charlize. Preoccupied with the missing sprites, she'd used the pretense of admiring the flowers to search for them. Now, Dylan's unexpected curiosity about the Magic Tower's visit to the underworld piqued her interest. To prevent the astute young emperor from connecting Kyla to herself, Charlize concealed the true target, Alfonso, a fellow experimental subject. Dylan, however, sensed her deception. If the Magic Tower's visit truly concerned the orphanage children, Kane would have shown more concern after the mission. Unlike before, Dylan didn't simply acquiesce to Charlize's explanation. According to Adianak's report, he countered, the mages displayed no unusual behavior. Charlize was taken aback. Dylan was challenging her. Dylan pressed on with his analysis. Their objective seemed quite specific, as if confirming whether something had been completely eliminated. He knew Charlize was withholding information for a reason. But he had one more question. What exactly is Kyla? The question struck Charlize to her core. Dylan had brought up Kyla, with little room left to maneuver. She calmly explained how Kyla was forged from a living person who had ingested a large quantity of a highlight fragments, transforming them into sentient metal. But Dylan's questions continued. Did the person who became Kyla lose their sense of self, or were they consumed by demonic energy? And what was Kyla's true nature? Charlize, the very embodiment of the demonic sword, forced a smile. A monster, I suppose, she replied, striving to maintain her composure. Dylan didn't comment on her answer, instead emphasizing his unwavering loyalty. No matter what you say, he assured her, I will believe you. Snowflakes drifted down as his words hung in the air. Charlize, catching a snowflake in her hand, remained oblivious to the deeper meaning behind his declaration, simply expressing her gratitude for his trust. Her words were cut short as Dylan draped his warm coat over her shoulders. I love you, he confessed once more, his voice thick with emotion. Charlize, however, still interpreted his words as a simple expression of affection. She couldn't comprehend that he had foreseen this day from the moment they met, when Dylan was still a child, resistant to opening his heart. But Charlize's gentle persistence had chipped away at his walls. From the day he accepted her unwavering dedication, Dylan had strived tirelessly to claim the throne. He had always given his all for her, holding nothing back. He had always strived. His voice trembled as he spoke. Why? He asked, his voice filled with anguish and longing. Don't you understand me? His slender fingers brushed against her stunned face. I love you, he confessed, his voice heavy with sincerity. I love you. Charlize considered herself a master manipulator, yet she found herself caught in her own game. She had intended to use Dylan's love for her own ends, but now, faced with his genuine confession, she was utterly at a loss. One thing was certain. Dylan wasn't giving up on his pursuit of Charlize. While giving her time to consider, his methods became increasingly overt and passionate. A portrait of Charlize arrived. The maids marveled at the artist's skill. Just looking at it, one could feel the artist's love for Charlize. Charlize herself was stunned. As the magic swordsman Kira, she had seen this painting before, though the subject should have been the 7th imperial consort. The signature in the bottom right corner, after Dylan's supposed death, had been confirmed to belong to the genius painter himself. Now, this testament to his love was presented to her. She considered for a moment, then decided to hang the portrait above the piano he was teaching her to play. The first step was always the hardest. Now that Dylan had made his move, she would no longer hide her affections. The next day, Dylan, arriving to give Charlize her piano lesson, immediately noticed the love letter Charlize was reading. A plan formed in his mind. He stopped the servant who was about to leave. With a gentlemanly bow, he inquired whether Charlize would feel pressured if someone were to openly court her. No one noticed the devious smile that flickered across his face when she answered in the negative. He straightened, taking Charlize's hand, and declared in a cheerful voice, I doubt any noble would dare show affection to the woman the emperor is pursuing. This domineering statement left the maids forced to witness this display of affection, blushing furiously. Charlize, however, didn't understand that he was expressing his jealousy. The melodious piano music created a harmonious atmosphere between them. But then, Dylan abruptly changed the subject. "But is it alright if I call you Charlize sometimes?" The sudden intimacy made Charlize uncomfortable. She nervously brushed him off, telling him to do as he pleased. Thankfully, a servant arrived with their meal, rescuing her from the awkwardness. She stared in surprise at the dish prepared especially for her. It brought back memories of her childhood. Back then, this fruit had been her favorite, but the servants, taking advantage of her vulnerability, had brazenly eaten the fruit themselves, telling her afterward that it had been quite delicious. How did Dylan know? As Dylan fed her a piece of the fruit, those once bitter memories warmed with his presence. Even the unpleasant memories of her time in Paran were now tinged with a nostalgic sweetness. There were many theories about the origins of songs, but Dylan believed in only one, that they were created to seduce. And he had written a song for Charlize. He played it for her during their lesson. The beautiful melody, devoid of any falsehood, conveyed the depths of his heart. Charlize understood his sincerity. Dylan truly loved her. Thanks to Dylan's deliberate pronouncements in front of the maids, rumors of the emperor's open pursuit of the imperial tutor had begun to spread. Naturally, the rumors reached Cahul's ears. He had long suspected Dylan's affection for Charlize. But why did it make him feel so uneasy? Lost in thought, his sword was knocked from his hand by his sparring partner. As a knight, he should never let go of his sword. He had fallen for Charlize, hadn't he? Not long after, at the awards ceremony celebrating the successful suppression of the rebellion, they met again. Charlize's subordinates all received awards, but she, who had contributed the most, received none. Those perceptive enough, like Cahul, understood. This was a deliberate move by the emperor to emphasize Charlize's paramount importance. This deviation from the course of events in her past life made her sense danger. Stopping Charlize, who had just finished congratulating him, Cahul spoke seriously. "I hope you won't get too close to His Majesty." He couldn't deny his personal feelings were involved, but for both personal and professional reasons, he had to say it. Although he is very attractive, official matters are more important. To Charlize, these words were both a confession and a warning. "Such directness," she teased playfully. "How very like you." What she didn't say was that she had no intention of heeding his warning. She quickly excused herself from Cahul. After all, the Selena Empire's envoy would be arriving soon, and she needed to prepare to receive them. With no senior female members of the royal family present, Charlize acted as hostess. The Selena envoy, famed for their diamond mines, presented her with a welcoming gift, an exquisite diamond necklace. As a matter of courtesy, Charlize graciously accepted. But later, at the banquet, Dylan, preoccupied as he should have been with other matters, appeared nonetheless. He'd come bearing a diamond necklace, eager to present it to her. 8 deep blue diamonds formed the centerpiece, surrounded by a constellation of smaller stones that made the entire box shimmer. Logically, Dylan should have known that the emissaries had already gifted her a diamond necklace. This should have aroused Charlize's suspicion. As if anticipating her thoughts, Dylan explained. He had given her a necklace for her birthday previously and hadn't intended to give a similar gift again. However, he felt that any gift he gave her had to be more precious than anyone else's. The man's competitive spirit confounded. Dylan wanted Charlize to experience only the most beautiful things, to witness only beauty, to hear only the most enchanting words, because she was the most precious person to him. As he spoke these tender words, Dylan's hands weren't idle. He personally fastened the necklace around Charlize's neck. And Charlize, whose mind had been frequently troubled by Cahul's dangerous pronouncements, found a strange peace in this moment. Looking at Dylan before her, all her anxieties seemed to dissipate. She couldn't understand, though. Dylan was as gentle as ever, yet something felt different now. Spread the word quickly. Charlize kissed Dylan. Apparently, after the banquet, the beloved young emperor invited Charlize to view the beautiful scenery of the icy courtyard that night. The silver-clad branches and vines filled Charlize with wonder, though she lamented that the beauty would fade with the passing of winter. Dylan immediately offered to have preservation magic cast upon them, so they would never melt, even though Charlize argued that the fact that all things must eventually end was what made them so beautiful, and refused the offer. However, Dylan's compliment, "I don't see any so-called end in you," convinced her to reconsider. Witnessing his pursuit of love accelerating at an astounding pace, one could only sigh and acknowledge his genius. A genius in every aspect, it seemed. This topic of eternal beauty, however, sparked Charlize's curiosity about what Dylan had thought when he first met her. Dylan, having learned the art of playing hard to get, countered with a question. Do you want to hear the truth or an answer that will please you? Charlize, with a rare touch of girlish willfulness, replied, Can I hear both? Dylan quickly adopting an expression of exasperated fondness as he addressed her by name. If you reciprocate my love, I'll tell you both answers. Charlize didn't respond, and Dylan didn't press her, gently leading her further into the mystery. But Charlize, who had finally understood her own heart, yet couldn't respond, felt a sharp pang of pain. Driven by her quest for revenge, she had always been wary of love, even using Dylan to achieve her goals. Despite this, Dylan remained unfazed, continuing to shower her with love and respect and supporting her revenge plan. Watching the gentle man before her, who wouldn't hesitate to lower his noble form even for something as trivial as her untied shoelace. She lifted his chin. While he was momentarily stunned, she leaned in and gave a firm, fleeting kiss. A delicate blush colored both their faces. Dylan, recovering his wits, wouldn't miss this golden opportunity. Turning passive to active, he stood, pulled Charlize into his arms, and kissed her lips, the very lips that haunted his dreams. Charlize allowed herself to be swept away. After all, this man was willing to overthrow his own empire, to accompany her on her quest for revenge without condition. What harm was there in falling in love? Time, or whoever dictates its passage, seemed to blur. When Charlize gently pushed Dylan's enraptured face away, a flicker of confusion crossed his features. You didn't like that? Clutching Dylan's clothes, Charlize denied it. That's not it. She wanted to tell him that she felt the same way about him. Dylan's heart melted. While her words weren't quite a confession, it didn't matter if she wasn't completely certain. He would fill the cracks in her heart himself. Lowering his gaze, he playfully whispered, his arms still around her, I command you to come to my chambers tomorrow night with champagne. We'll watch the fireworks together. Looking at the man before her, Charlize understood perfectly. He was using the fireworks as an excuse to spend the night with her. Where did such an understanding young man come from? An unmarried man and woman were about to embark on a magical night together. A sprite, ever so thoughtful, offered Charlize some Sprite dust, hoping to enhance her special night. Charlize declined, however, because, rather than relying on external forces to advance her relationship with Dylan, she preferred to experience it with her truest self, to confirm her feelings. But the mention of Sprite dust reminded her of the dream she'd had when she last used it, the dream where Dylan had yearned for Kyla. Why did you make me have that dream? Charlize wondered aloud, her question directed at the sprites and the ominous smoke. Their response was cryptic, hinting at destiny and their duty to protect her fate. But Charlize, resolute as ever, refused their help. It doesn't matter, they seemed to say, because everything is destiny. Charlize, however, pressed them, desperate to understand the meaning behind their words. The sprites vanished once more. The following evening, as promised, Charlize went to Dylan's room to watch the fireworks. Dylan, his affections seemingly accepted, was ready to reveal his true first impression of Charlize. The honest version, he confessed, was that from the moment he saw her, he knew they were kindred spirits. The more romantic version, however, was that in a single glance, he felt a sense of predestined fate. As he spoke, a wistful look came over him, lost in the memory of that moment when he knew she was meant to be his. Just as he finished speaking, the fireworks began to erupt outside. Dylan set down his glass, his playful demeanor shifting as he turned to the matter at hand. With a slight hesitation, he asked, Your presence here tonight, does it mean you agree? Bathed in the warm glow of the fireworks, Charlize offered a gentle affirmation. Relieved, Dylan approached her slowly, each step measured and deliberate. If you wish me to stop, he murmured, simply push my shoulder, even the slightest touch, and I will not continue. Faced with such gentle and considerate affection, how could Charlize bring herself to push him away? The dazzling fireworks display served as a vibrant testament to the burgeoning passion between them. The next thing Charlize knew, she was drifting into a mysterious dream. She found herself in what appeared to be an empty, sacred temple. There was no exit in sight, nor could she discern any entrance. Strangely, instead of fear, she felt a sense of protection. Her gaze swept across the space, and, as it landed on the main hall, a sudden wave of panic washed over her, a feeling of being suppressed by some unknown entity. Her eyes flew open. Dylan's watchful eyes met hers from the pillow beside her. Seeing her awake, the sleepless emperor softly urged her to rest a while longer. "Teacher, may I kiss you?" he whispered. Later, during their sparring practice, the clash of their swords was almost overshadowed by the palpable romantic tension. As their practice ended, Charlize gazed at the man before her, his eyes full of adoration. "He has such a beautiful smile," she thought, marveling at how such a handsome and imposing man could be so utterly smitten. The previous night, he had anxiously asked her, "What are we to each other?" Tradition dictated that an emperor could not have a lover. If the woman was of low standing, she would be a hidden mistress. If she were of noble birth, she would become an empress or a concubine. But these conventions held little meaning for Charlize. When she finally declared, "We are lovers," Dylan's head snapped up. Like a puppy receiving a treat, his joy was uncontainable. He wanted to announce it to the world, to let the entire continent know of their relationship. Lost in the throes of love, Dylan blindly believed in its eternity, oblivious to the cool resolve in Charlize's blue eyes. For her, revenge remained paramount. Still, she mused, indulging in love occasionally. Wasn't so bad. The next day, Dylan's announcement of their relationship sent ripples of excitement through the city. In stark contrast to the general enthusiasm, Cahul was filled with a deep sense of foreboding. He knew Charlize would never be the empress the nobles envisioned. If her goal was truly Dylan, the announcement would have been of a betrothal, not a mere love affair. They disregarded the laws and customs, choosing to be lovers. And in this era of peace and stability, the emperor's personal knights, the Adenak, continued their rigorous training. All signs pointed to Dylan having no desire to be a wise ruler. Coupled with Charlize's strange behavior during several missions, Cahul was certain she was plotting something. Cahul tried to shake off these troubling thoughts, reminding himself to forget her, just as she had asked. But the mere thought of her caused him a pang of heartache. Meanwhile, the cause of his pain was blissfully unaware, gazing at Dylan with eyes brimming with affection. She understood Dylan's feelings. After all, they had agreed the previous night to spend all their free time together. But afterward, Dylan hadn't touched her. Lost in thought, she walked over and, rising on tiptoe, placed a comforting kiss on his lips. "Just try to bear with this for now," she murmured, only to be enveloped in a tight embrace by the clingy Dylan. He nuzzled against her, whimpering softly, his desires clearly unsated. He wanted more, another taste of their newfound intimacy. What ordinary couples enjoyed, Dylan and Charlize would have too. Matching outfits? A romantic opera dinner? It was all being arranged, a whirlwind of affection orchestrated by the love-struck emperor. Before the sun dipped below the horizon, they strolled through a magnificent forest bathed in the warm hues of sunset. The endless golden light painted the trees in a romantic glow, creating a breathtaking backdrop for their burgeoning love. It was a moment Charlize would cherish forever. But for Dylan, it wasn't enough. He gazed at her with an intensity that spoke volumes. "There's so much I want to do with you," he confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "So many memories to make, so many places to see together." Charlize responded calmly, "There's no rush. We could do them all one by one." But despite her reassuring words, Dylan remained silent, his gaze fixed on her, a flicker of anxiety in his eyes. He felt a sense of urgency, a fear that if they didn't seize the moment, the opportunity might vanish forever. Charlize, seemingly attuned to his unspoken worries, gently continued, "Your Majesty, legend says that if two lovers walk this path together, they'll be together forever. I'm here and I won't leave." The gentle evening breeze rustled through the trees, carrying her promise on the wind. Charlize's words soothed Dylan's troubled heart. Soon, they arrived at the final destination of their date, the orphanage they had established together. The children, upon seeing them, rushed forward in a flurry of excitement, greeting the handsome brother and beautiful sister with unrestrained enthusiasm. Dylan scanned the crowd, searching for the child with a lisp who had previously questioned the nature of their relationship. He crouched down, a gentle smile gracing his lips. "Little one," he began, "Do you remember the question you asked me last time?" He had come specifically to provide an answer. "We are indeed in love." As the children erupted in cheers, Charlize smiled wryly, realizing Dylan's true intention for visiting the orphanage. Suddenly, a rustling sound from the nearby bushes caught Charlize's attention. It was the little girl who had previously detected the scent of sprites on her. The girl mumbled something about the smell of blood. Charlize initially assumed the girl was referring to her, but following the child's gaze, she realized it was directed towards Dylan. Could Dylan also carry the scent of echolite fragments? A wave of uncertainty washed over her as she approached the little girl who had curled up into a tight ball. Charlize knelt down and offered a gentle greeting. But before she could voice her question, the girl clutched her head, trembling with fear, and insisted she knew nothing. Seeing the child's distress, Charlize decided against pursuing the matter further. However, the doubt in her heart only deepened. Surely, the girl couldn't have been referring to Dylan. Could she? The question, born from her unwavering trust in her intuition, filled her with a sense of foreboding. Charlize listened in stunned silence as Payne revealed the secrets of the magic tower. It turned out, forging a living sword wasn't the tower's ultimate goal. They sought to resurrect the source of their magic, a deity other than echolite. The creation of Kyla, the evil god, was intended to facilitate this deity's descent. Payne's words began to align with fragmented memories flashing through her mind. In the initial stages of becoming the magic sword, she recalled the excited whispers of those involved. "He has absorbed all the demonic energy," they had proclaimed, creating the purest form of evil. But during the subsequent ritual, their calls had gone unanswered, just as they believed they had failed. Charlize, as Kyla, had gained consciousness. Still holding the sword against Payne, Charlize pressed him for more information. She had initially summoned him to determine Dylan's connection to echolite, but she had stumbled upon a far greater secret. Her expression impassive, she demanded that Payne reveal everything he knew. The Magic Tower's Kyla project had never truly succeeded. Even with partial success, their objective remained unattainable. Due to the structure of magic, even if the evil god descended, control of Kyla would ultimately reside with the host body. But the host will gradually absorb the evil god. Payne continued, his voice taking on a strangely relieved tone, becoming the true evil god. A wave of terror washed over Charlize at his words. "The entire absorption process won't take more than 50 years, Payne added, as if offering comfort. "So, rest assured, the Kyla project failed long ago. There will be no evil god." Far from reassured, Charlize abruptly retracted the short sword, severing a few strands of Payne's hair. His face paled, and he cried out in terror, "What are you doing? I've told you such valuable information." Charlize remained impassive. The information was certainly interesting, but she wouldn't join a filio. With that, the dagger in her hand shifted back towards Payne. He let the cold moonlight spill into the room, casting Charlize's back in a melancholic light. Tyne couldn't possibly know that Charlize had been a magic sword for a full 400 years. According to him, she had long since become a malevolent god. But in truth, Charlize's absorption of demonic energy had begun far earlier than he knew. Charlize's brother, Arkin, met with Cahol again. Since his previous encounter, where he'd feigned ignorance, he had remembered something. As a child, he had intended to examine the demonic corpse their father had brought home. But he had unexpectedly witnessed a young Charlize absorbing demonic energy. Unable to cope with his mother's death, he had distanced himself from Charlize from that day forward. Hearing this, Cahol grew even angrier. To reject a young, innocent child because of demonic energy. But after the initial surge of anger, he calmed down. These words weren't entirely useless. Charlize, having searched through countless texts, had only found fragmented mentions of the malevolent god in the Emperor's private library. He originated from echolite, but in his quest to become the sole god, he shattered echolite into pieces. Gods were near perfect, while the limit of human achievement was to become a master. Perhaps the reason she could surpass master and reach the saint realm was precisely because she was this malevolent god. Charlize stared at the yellow roses in the courtyard, lost in thought. Even with the introduction of the concept of gods, which had caused some unforeseen variables, her thirst for revenge remained unquenched. Then, destroying the magic tower would suffice. She wouldn't accept those few lines in a book as fact, nor would she hate Ashlight like the malevolent god. For centuries, she had never abandoned her belief in her own humanity. The sound of hurried breathing behind her broke Charlize's contemplation. It was Dylan, arriving with a harried look and disheveled appearance. The man closed his eyes, composing himself before uttering a cryptic phrase. "No matter what you do, I won't mind. I only ask that you don't leave me." Charlize glanced down at her hand, tightly clasped in his, and promised that she wouldn't leave. The man's expression relaxed, and he joked, half serious, "If you were to leave me, I would surely go mad." Charlize understood his insecurity. Although they had journeyed together to this point, she had never fully revealed her inner thoughts to him. Perhaps now was the opportune moment. The instant Dylan began to speak, Charlize spoke as well, offering no deference. She frankly told the young emperor that she desired not just the decline of the empire, but its utter destruction, and she would stake everything on it. "Are you willing to follow me?" Dylan didn't hesitate. He took Charlize's hand, kissed it, and vowed that whatever she desired, he would make it happen, even if it cost him his life. Late that night, Lucy, the head of the assassination guild, once again acted as a courier, delivering Payne's letter to Charlize. Payne, it turned out, had been tracked by the magic tower and was forced to flee. He needed to tell her one last piece of information vitally connected to her past. Charlize looked at the letter, hesitant to meet with Payne. She wanted to unravel the remaining mysteries, but would knowing everything truly bring happiness? If she didn't uncover the truth, she might never be able to fulfill her plan to destroy the Empire and the Magic Tower. Thinking of the man devoted to following her, Charlize felt a flicker of hope. Once she achieved her revenge and assuaged her grief, could they then spend the rest of their lives together? Lost in thought, she tore up the letter, and Payne was once again transported before her. Just moments before, Dylan had held his beloved close, whispering sweet nothings, secretly rejoicing that he had finally reached her heart. He was unaware that after he fell asleep, his love had already resolved to abandon him. Rewinding to the previous night, the troublemaker Payne had appeared, revealing the reason he was so determined to recruit Charlize into a filio. It turned out that at the tender age of 13, Charlize had submitted a flawless academic thesis, applying to become the 13th prince's tutor. And later, in an astonishingly short period, she had helped the obscure 13th prince ascend to the throne. These remarkable achievements had caught their attention. That thesis was certainly not something an uneducated young lady could have written, let alone the feat of guiding a prince to the pinnacle of power. All of this, it's all connected to Charlize's true identity. Hearing this, Charlize's azure eyes turned icy. Should she just kill him? Fortunately, Payne's seemingly irrelevant answer saved him. With a smug look of certainty, he declared, "You are a fragment of Ashlight, right? Supporting the ascension of an unremarkable prince. It was all to hide your true identity." Despite this unexpected deduction, Charlize's expression remained impassive. No, Payne was taken aback. He'd never considered this possibility. Suddenly, a thought struck him. Perhaps Charlize didn't know what being an Ashlight fragment meant. Clearing his throat, he continued his explanation. After the evil god transformed Ashlight into fragments, there was one largest fragment. That is the true fragment. It's pure and superior. And finding this fragment is one of Affilio's goals. Every few centuries, this fragment takes on a human form. Its main characteristic is the manifestation of undeniable talent. Hearing this, Charlize felt a chill run down her spine. She knew better than anyone that since birth, the only person who had displayed such talent in every field was Dylan. So when Dylan once again held her and confessed his love, Charlize, having absorbed the evil god, had already made up her mind to leave. She loved him too, but to keep him alive, she had to abandon him. Tightly embracing the man in her arms, she recalled the latter half of Payne's explanation. The evil god, Kyla, will kill the true Ashlight fragment. No one knows if Kyla's plan succeeded. Even if it did, the human who absorbed the evil god will exhibit a particular trait, a murderous intent towards the Ashlight fragment. They might be able to suppress other negative thoughts, but the desire to kill Ashlight is absolutely irrepressible. So, in Affilio's eyes, Charlize, as the Ashlight fragment, needs to be protected. No one knows where the evil god truly is. Charlize had thought she'd found her first ray of light in her long life, found her happiness, but she couldn't guarantee she wouldn't kill Dylan. because she hated everything and everyone that had turned her into Kyla. Stroking Dylan's peaceful, sleeping face, Charlize thought painfully, even if she left, Dylan, as the noble and holy Asholite fragment, would eventually overcome his pain and find happiness again. Charlize, abandoning Dylan in the name of love, had already set a departure date with Pain, but still clinging to a sliver of hope, she asked, if the true fragment leaves, will the evil god truly be unaffected? Pain surmised that it would be, because the closer they are, the stronger the killing intent. Charlize thought back on the past 6 years they'd spent together, and finally severed her remaining hope. During combat practice, Dylan, like the suppressed Asholite fragment, had never won, and Dylan was always unguarded in front of her. If she had the intent to kill, then any moment would be the perfect opportunity. She envied the orphaned children, the experimental subjects. Pitiful as they were, they didn't carry the aura of the evil god. And herself, having become the vessel of the evil god, she didn't know if it was a curse or something else entirely. After bidding farewell to Pain, she went to the library. Before leaving, she would destroy all the materials related to the Kyla project, eliminating any possibility of the experimental subjects mentioned in the documents harming Dylan. As for the Duke's mansion, there was no need to return. She had nothing left there to hold on to. Her mind raced through the important people and events of the past 400 years, becoming the magic sword, traveling through time to tame Dylan, forcing Dietrich to abdicate, meeting Cahul, who remembered his past life. Cahul. Charlize had almost forgotten him. There was something she needed to confirm. Cahul was startled by Charlize's sudden visit. He quickly rose to greet her, but before he could speak, Charlize cut straight to the point, asking if he still remembered his past life. Her serious expression clashed sharply with the gentle tone of her abrupt question, like a hunter poised to strike. Oblivious, Cahul nodded. He only remembered searching for her when she disappeared, but then giving up one day. He didn't remember anything after that. Charlize assessed him, deciding he wasn't lying. Only then did she subtly withdraw her killing intent. He was lucky he hadn't realized she was Kyla, considering they'd only met once in their previous lives. At the engagement ceremony, it was remarkable that Cahul could still search for her missing self. He would undoubtedly repay this kindness. Having received her answer, Charlize departed without a backward glance. She paid no mind to Cahul's urgent call of master. This haste, of course, was so she could spend more time with her beloved. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Dylan and Charlize watched the vibrant hues of the sunset together. He still couldn't believe his happiness. Every step he took with Charlize felt like walking on air. Seeing Dylan's childlike smile, Charlize swallowed the words that were about to spill from her lips. Instead, she said she was also happy, very happy. But beautiful moments are always fleeting. Dylan had to attend to affairs of state. Though he was loath to part from Charlize, it was all right. They would meet again tomorrow. There was a score to settle. Charlize's last stop before leaving was the prison holding dysentery the first. The emperor who had caused her so much pain was a shadow of his former self. He sat slumped against the wall, stripped of all dignity, muttering curses under his breath. But when Charlize spoke his name, he instantly recognized her as the demonic sword, Kyla. He began to thrash violently, unable to comprehend how someone forged into a demonic sword could still retain a human form. Charlize surmised that being forced to swallow a fragment of Asholite must have triggered his memories of their past life. A few seconds of silence followed, as if he were piecing together the fragmented memories of 2 lifetimes. Suddenly realizing something, he looked at Charlize in disbelief. Her presence here could only mean one thing. His empire had fallen. Charlize leaned in close, her voice dripping with malice, confirming his fears. The fallen emperor trembled as she described the inferno engulfing his land, the once mighty walls reduced to rubble. He shuddered at the image of countless subjects reduced to ashes. Refusing to believe it, he called out for his crown prince, but Charlize silenced him with a swift stroke of her blade. The same blow destroyed the monster fragment within him. Turning her back on the blazing inferno, Charlize knew she should have done this long ago. Her long-awaited revenge was finally complete. She knew her blood-soaked plan had nothing to do with Dylan. It was she who had twisted his once righteous soul. He had lost his reason and was now hurtling towards destruction. She hoped Dylan wouldn't follow the same path. When she arrived at the appointed meeting place, Pain found her listless, her eyes devoid of light. He spoke with trepidation, fearing for his life should he displease her. Only when the teleportation array shimmered to life did Charlize finally put an end to her dreams of a future with Dylan, to their vows of unwavering devotion. News of the fire in the dungeon, along with the master's disappearance, quickly reached Dylan. But Dylan remained surprisingly calm. He first inspected the scene of Dysentery's death. The weapon left behind revealed the killer's identity. It was the gift he had given Charlize for her birthday. He declined his attendant's offer to search for the master, understanding the turmoil Charlize must be experiencing after confronting the source of her trauma. He believed she would return when she was ready. But as seasons changed, Charlize never returned. From a young age, Dylan possessed an intellect and perceptiveness far beyond his years. Witnessing the intrigues and desires within the palace, he learned to trust no one. He became indifferent to others, even to life itself. The 7th Imperial Consort often found young Dylan playing a morbid game on a chessboard, predicting which royal family member would die first. Worried, she began to teach him that killing was wrong, that it wasn't his only option. Young Dylan couldn't understand his mother's concern. It was just a game, but precocious as he was, he saw the worry in her eyes and relented. Only when his mother embraced him, her smile brimming with pride, did the endless weariness Dylan concealed behind his innocent facade become apparent. Then Charlize appeared. He saw through her carefully crafted presentation at once. It was designed to capture his attention. He was puzzled, though. This person clearly had simpler paths to prominence. Why the elaborate ruse to get close to him? As they interacted, he discovered that this teacher wasn't just erudite, but possessed remarkably prescient insights. More importantly, she saw through his boredom, his utter ennui with a life devoid of meaning. The moment his pretense was shattered, a deep yearning surged through him. He wanted to possess her. Dylan chose to surrender to fate, willingly sinking into the mire that was Charlize. A dark possessiveness began to fester within him. The mere sight of another man offering Charlize a handkerchief was enough to make him want to sever the offender's hand. Yet, when his gaze met Charlize's, only a warm smile graced his features. The sinister thoughts were buried deep, growing ever larger in the shadows. He wanted Charlize to belong solely to him. He even entertained the twisted notion of preserving her as a specimen, or perhaps possessing her completely, branding her as his own, leaving no room for another's covetous glance. Just as these warped desires threatened to overwhelm him, Charlize offered herself to him, body and soul. He thought, this is taming. Every day that followed was filled with bliss and contentment, until he was abandoned in the frigid depths of winter. At first, he remained steadfast in his belief that she would return. They had made vows, after all. When spring arrived, he launched his campaign, armed with the war plans they had devised together. His first thought upon his triumphant return was to celebrate with Charlize. But he was met only with an echoing emptiness. He reasoned that she would surely be back by summer. He filled her wardrobe with summer garments, meticulously chosen in anticipation of her arrival. Yet, as the season changed and the unsold finery was cleared away, his mistress remained absent. Day after day, through autumn, he yearned for winter. Surely, she would return then. It would be cold. He would need to commission winter attire for her. But 3 winters came and went, and still she did not return. Alone in the room that no longer held the faintest trace of Charlize's presence, Dylan replayed her promises of unwavering devotion over and over. Only then did he accept the truth. Charlize had tamed him, only to abandon him. The agony of rejection brought tears to his eyes, but tears would not be his undoing. His resolve to possess her only hardened. She had abandoned him, and he would follow her own teachings, seizing what he desired by any means necessary, no matter the cost. The pure-hearted lover had fallen, giving rise to a chilling, monstrous obsession. After 3 years of waiting in vain, he finally issued the command to find his faithless lover. He ordered his knights to bring her back, even if it meant their deaths. Meanwhile, Charlize, the object of his search, had risen through the ranks to become the backbone of Affilio. She led them in dismantling one magic tower stronghold after another, turning the hunters into the hunted. One such stronghold, having received warning, hadn't even begun to evacuate, before Charlize, single-handedly and with ruthless efficiency, wiped them out. But as she ventured deeper into the subterranean complex, she stumbled upon a horrifying scene. countless civilians were imprisoned. It seemed the evil god's magic wasn't enough for the denizens of the magic tower. They were abducting ordinary people to extract their magical essence. Whether in this life or the last, the magic tower's methods remained utterly repugnant. The anguished cries of the imprisoned civilians drew Charlize back to the present. They were still alive, but their existence was a torment. With their last breaths, they begged Charlize for a merciful end, and no one could empathize with these civilians more than Charlize. With a heavy heart, she granted their pleas, knowing their deaths would not be in vain. The magic tower would fall. In the 3 years that had passed, the branches of the magic tower had been all but eradicated. It was time to destroy the trunk. Gazing out the window, Charlize reflected on her years in exile. She had expected the separation from Dylan to be agonizing, but the pain had subsided surprisingly quickly. Perhaps it was because she had poured all her energy into her vendetta. But he could have easily sent someone to track and monitor Dylan. Yet he did nothing. Perhaps Dylan had already forgotten him. That, of course, was a fleeting thought. He was quickly proven wrong by urgent intelligence from his subordinates. 3 years later, hearing Dylan's name again, and in connection with funding the inevitable collaboration between both sides of the magic tower, Charlize's face darkened. He couldn't fathom Dylan's intentions. But if left unchecked, the tragedy of Project Kyla would repeat itself, and the magic tower, bolstered by royal support, would undoubtedly become an unstoppable force. He quickly devised a plan to break the deadlock. If a collaboration was to occur, the Magic Tower's higher-ups would have to appear in person. And if they seized that opportunity, they could annihilate the Magic Tower. Although risky, it was a golden opportunity worth taking. Dylan, now completely consumed by his obsession, searched the bookshelves his teacher had frequented, looking for any trace of him. He discovered that Charlize had only browsed forbidden books related to Ashlyte. Though he didn't know the reason, anything related to Project Kyla ignited Dylan's fury, as if the project had already succeeded. But why? Burn all the materials related to Project Kyla? He knew Charlize, with his perfect memory, had already memorized the contents. Yet, Dylan, seemingly disinterested, abandoned his investigation. His sole desire now was to possess him. "The net is cast," he said, his gaze heavy as he addressed the shadow guard who brought the report. "Don't underestimate him, and don't delude yourselves into thinking you can overpower him with brute force." He wanted a foolproof capture. He truly was the person who understood Charlize best in this world. Knowing Charlize's obsession with Project Kyla, he used the collaboration with the Magic Tower as bait to lure him in. Then, he would use Adenak, whom Charlize himself had trained, to capture him. Even if Charlize had the ability to break through, he wouldn't be able to bring himself to harm Adenak. Only when Charlize was completely surrounded by 13 members, led by Hugo, did Dylan finally appear, his demeanor unhurried. "You haven't changed a bit, Charlize." Ronan's familiar voice froze Charlize in place. As the voice drew closer, Charlize's chin was abruptly lifted. "I've come for you, to possess you completely." The words were like a final pronouncement, marking the end of Charlize's freedom. They were followed by a chilling interrogation, dark enough to drip with malice. "Why did you run away after taming me?" Charlize was taken aback. Had Dylan's voice always been so low and chilling? It was a stark contrast to the gentle, shy voice he remembered. The relentless questions continued. "If you had a reason to abandon me, you should have at least told me. Even an excuse would have been better than nothing." Charlize released the sword he held, closed his eyes, and responded with silence. Dylan laughed. It didn't matter. He had already made up his mind. He would have Charlize, no matter the means. The abandonment of his beloved had erased the innocent, principled youth he once was. And the returned lover said he had changed. Yes, he had. He was no longer the Dylan of the past. He was now Nuga Road. Dylan's voice, low and intimate as a lover's whisper, echoed in Charlize's ear. "How long did you expect me to remain the same? You never returned. Did you expect me to remain unchanged until I died?" The final whisper transformed into a cold, oppressive question. Charlize's lips were pressed tightly together, but he still offered no reply. Dylan was right. Hadn't he been the one to shape Dylan into this? He was the one who had hoped for him to become a tyrant, the one who had instilled those very teachings. Who could he blame? But what puzzled him was how the pure, untainted fragment of ashylite could exude such a dark aura, as if corroded by a black miasma. Before he could understand, Dylan ordered the Affilio members to be imprisoned. He didn't kill them immediately, but Charlize shouldn't breathe a sigh of relief just yet. After all, everyone had witnessed how he had treated Ferdy. This blatant threat shocked Charlize. Wasn't this condemning them to hell? Dylan simply stared at Charlize, his gaze unwavering. "I was tamed by you," he said, "and that is not my fault." Ultimately, the Affilio members, along with Charlize, were confined in a nearby hotel. Charlize was afforded VIP treatment, but he had no freedom. Charlize had tried to leave several times, but Dylan's 80 guards kept blocking her way. Though they trembled before her fierce presence, they showed no sign of yielding. Dylan finally arrived, intending to escort Charlize back to the palace. But Charlize's first words were a sharp question. How long did he intend to keep the Affilio people imprisoned? Dylan's initially warm expression turned instantly glacial. How could she brush him aside and concern herself with others? In the next instant, his tone softened. A gloved hand caressed Charlize's face as he murmured, "Let's go." The jarring shift made Charlize acutely aware that the Dylan she had once loved had irrevocably changed. Quickly weighing the situation, Charlize reasoned that since the magic tower had been mostly cleared out, complying with Dylan's wishes for now wouldn't hurt. But she hadn't anticipated Dylan's further demands. Possessive and obsessive. "Don't speak to other men. Don't look at other men. Don't even think about other men. Only look at me. Only listen to me. Only care about me." For 3 years. 3 years had been long enough to mold Dylan into a man of unnerving patience. He stared at Charlize, unwavering without a word, until Charlize, unable to bear the suffocating silence, finally broke it. "Your Majesty, why are you looking at me like that?" Unfazed by the question, Dylan leaned closer, his own question a counterthrust. "Do you find the silence awkward?" Charlize, feeling exposed, retreated into silence once more. Dylan extended a hand, inviting her closer. Charlize could have refused, but her body seemed to have a will of its own. A moment later, she stood before him. "Can you bear my resentment?" Dylan asked, his hand on Charlize's forearm, his casual tone belying the sharp, pointed question. Charlize evaded it. "I've missed you too," she said, her voice sincere. Dylan scoffed. He was no longer the naive lover of 3 years ago. He yanked Charlize closer, his gaze piercing. His eyes told her he didn't believe a word. The atmosphere, thick with tension, shifted, warped by their proximity. Dylan kissed her, ignoring her struggles, holding her captive in his embrace, as if to make up for the lost 3 years. He only released her when Charlize bit his lip, drawing blood. They had arrived at the palace. Charlize gazed at the empire she hadn't seen in so long. It was even more magnificent than she remembered, as if it had flourished in her absence. If one ignored the fear etched on the faces of the palace servants. Charlize was quickly ushered inside. Her accommodations had changed. She was no longer housed with Dylan as his imperial tutor, but given the queen's quarters. Dylan's intentions were clear. Even if she wanted to refuse, she had to consider what Dylan might do. He had allowed her previous maids to remain, likely believing that creating vulnerabilities for her was a better tactic than isolation. After 3 years away, her cherished jewelry, even small trinkets she had used, were carefully preserved. There were many new additions as well. Dylan must have meticulously chosen things he thought she would like, waiting for her return. 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. The accumulating possessions spoke volumes about Dylan's suffocating possessiveness and all-consuming love, even though such a consuming emotion could cloud one's reason. Even devoured entirely, Dylan had plunged in head first. Charlize closed the jewelry box, her heart heavy. She knew that if she didn't want Dylan to get hurt, she couldn't stay by his side forever. Looking at the portrait Dylan had painted, brimming with love, Charlize closed her eyes, steeling herself. When she opened them again, her emotions were carefully masked. Despite finding Charlize, Dylan, whose talents far surpassed others, wouldn't simply accept her return without exploring the reasons for her departure. Before searching for her, he had questioned Cahul. Cahul's expression had clearly indicated he knew something, and now Dylan had a better source of information. But when he found Payne, the other man's blurted question, "Is Charlize really all right?" followed by a curt "get out," and a warning that only he could speak Charlize's name, gave Dylan pause. Payne was intimidated by this clearly dangerous man. His tone became noticeably more respectful. But then the man seemed to hesitate, his casual demeanor towards Payne shifting from the easy familiarity he'd shown towards Payne's teacher. Payne's mind reeled. Who was this guy, threatening him one minute and then obsessing over formalities the next? Switching to a casual tone himself, Payne began to explain his relationship with Charlize, even mentioning the past. He started to say, "You and Charlize," but the name seemed to burn his tongue. He quickly corrected himself, stammering slightly. "When you and the commander were together, I even sent flowers to congratulate you." Although it wasn't anything special, Dylan stared at Payne impassively as he continued his rambling. "Anyway, my point is for the past 3 years, the commander and I, nothing happened. I'm just a subordinate. Understand?" Dylan remained silent. Even without Payne's explanation, he didn't think Charlize would ever look at him twice. Finally, Dylan revealed his true purpose. "Why did you have Charlize join Affilio?" Although Affilio used to be just a group researching Echolite, now it harbors failed test subjects from the Kira project. This question genuinely shocked Payne. Dylan not only knew they had approached and helped Charlize escape, but he also clearly understood the connection between Affilio and the Kira project. Unsure of what else Dylan knew, Payne chose a carefully crafted response, blending truth and lies. "Charlize joined because of his strength, and to a certain extent, our goals align. It's mutually beneficial." Dylan's fingers, tapping lightly on the table, stopped. He clearly didn't believe him. He then dropped a bombshell, voicing his suspicion. "Isn't it because Charlize was once a test subject of the Kira project?" The soft-spoken question echoed in Payne's ears like a demonic whisper. Terrifying. This was a world away from the Emperor Charlize often spoke of. He just denied that Charlize was a Kira subject. After all, their investigation showed that Charlize had barely left his family estate as a child. If Charlize were a test subject and reached his current combat level, he would have had to consume the fragments from infancy. The fact that Charlize is still alive means he didn't undergo experimentation. There's no other possibility. Payne felt a flicker of guilt as he spoke. He wasn't exactly lying, just omitting the fact that he believed Charlize to be a true Echolite fragment. Dylan, his intellect razor sharp, clearly took Payne's half-truth for a lie. "Then let's bring out something that will make you tell the truth." With a wave of his hand, a file that made Payne's blood run cold was placed on the table. It contained information known only to insiders, including detailed records of his sister Lydia's time as a test subject. She hadn't survived the ordeal, dying a tragic death. Looking at the horrific records, Payne trembled uncontrollably. And yet, this man with the angelic face made a devilish offer. He would exchange his sister's remains and the names of those responsible for her suffering for information. He wanted to know everything. Not a single detail could be left out. In stark contrast to this grim scene, the Empress's chambers were bright and cheerful. Mary, the maid, was brushing Charlize's hair. She chattered about the public's opinion of Dylan during Charlize's absence. Nobles and commoners alike were praising Dylan as the first true saintly emperor. Most importantly, in Charlize's absence, Dylan hadn't been involved with any other women. Hearing this, Charlize couldn't help but think, was Mary always this talkative? Charlize walked over to the window, gazing at the tranquil, starlit sky. He suddenly remembered the day Dylan played the piano, and he sang. Despite the passage of time, the sky remained unchanged. A sudden knock echoed through the room. Before Charlize could react, Dylan had pulled him into a tight embrace. He'd obviously overheard Charlize's murmur. He whispered in his ear, "Wasn't it you who ruined the memory of that day?" He then kissed Charlize's hair. "Tonight, you must stay by my side." His words were both seductive and possessive. Charlize turned, looking up at the man who now towered over him. He roughly grabbed Dylan's shirt, pulling him down for a deep kiss. The grieving Duke Rohan had finally been reunited with his wife, lost for so many years. But he wept like a child. After the eldest daughter-in-law's painful accusations, they were already filled with regret. But before they could make amends, news arrived of Charlize's disappearance. From that point on, the men of the Rohan family were utterly broken. Even when their retainers brought his close friend, Princess Kanine, to him, Duke Rohan was still only worried about what Rachel would think of him if she knew. He was completely oblivious to the fact that the person he had wronged the most was his own daughter. Unable to bear watching her friend continue to numb himself with alcohol, Duchess Kanine reluctantly told Duke Rohan about the Rohan family heirloom, a dream artifact crafted from Echolite tears, capable of allowing one to meet departed souls in their dreams. But the prerequisite for its use was for the user to pull themselves together after death. And so, the opening scene came to pass. His wife, as gentle as ever, softly wiped away his tears while speculating about their children's lives. Arkin must have become the captain of the Royal Knights by now. Had he perhaps found someone he loved? How was Dante doing? Duke Rohan answered each question. Rachel beamed with pride for her sons. Then, Rachel excitedly asked about their youngest, their daughter, Charlize. She looked just like him, so she must be very popular. Had she, like him, entered the academy and perhaps met someone special? At parties, did her two older brothers vie to be her dance partner? Duke Rohan was speechless. Tears streamed down his face. Rachel didn't resent Charlize at all. She loved her. Guilt crushed him. He covered his face, sobbing, unable to look at Rachel as she recounted the absurd things he had done. He had never held his daughter, never called her by name. He had even blamed her for his wife's death. He hadn't hired tutors for her, hadn't helped her make friends, hadn't given her a single gift. He had ruined her. Rachel froze, incredulous. She clung to the hope that her husband was just joking, as he often did. But the silence from across from her filled her with unease. A single, choked, "I'm sorry," shattered the last vestiges of that hope. Trembling, she asked why. She had always been so gentle. The man still couldn't meet her gaze. He had taken his grief and anger over losing her out on their newborn daughter. The reason was both ludicrous and devastating. Rachel covered her face with her hands, tears slipping through her fingers. She had believed with all her heart that he would love Charlize as much as he loved her. He understood her so well. But why? "I hate you. Why did you do that to our child?" A hysterical wail tore from the mother's lips. Duke Rohan silently endured her hatred. Why did he have to ask for forgiveness now? But even if it was too late, he wanted to help Charlize. Even if it wouldn't change anything, it didn't matter. The father knelt before his daughter, desperate to be of some use. He pleaded abjectly, "I can do anything for you, Imperial Tutor." But his words couldn't thaw the ice that had formed around her heart. The Rohan family was of little use to her now, but a pawn offered freely, there was no reason not to use it. Pushing aside the unpleasantness of the chance encounter with her wretched father, the outing she had wheedled had unexpectedly led her to the members of Affilio whom she had been worried about. Dylan had even thoughtfully arranged a luncheon for them to catch up. Charlize, however, remained suspicious. Is this place truly free of surveillance? At the table, she didn't hold back, stating with a detached air that the Rohan family intended to help them. The information stunned everyone present. None of them were naive. Charlize's encounter with Duke Rohan, followed by this meeting with the members of Affilio, was clearly Dylan's doing. If the Rohan family became involved, the consequences were predictable, but Charlize seemed unconcerned. Using every resource available was a sound strategy. No matter how small the chance, every opportunity to break the deadlock had to be seized. They would act in 3 days. After the meeting, Charlize called Payne aside. She needed to send a message to their contacts. Just as Payne began to worry about a magical message being intercepted, Charlize summoned spirits. With their help, she could ensure the message would be delivered discreetly, and instructed Payne to use this method of communication from now on. He only realized halfway through his sentence that Payne couldn't see the sprites. However, Payne, whose jaw was practically on the floor, clearly could see them. He was stunned, believing Charlize had summoned them using the power of Eshelite. Charlize's simple question, "You can see the sprites?" startled him even further. The sprites, whom Charlize considered adorable, were anything but benevolent. They were ancient servants of Eshelite, beings of a lower order. This wasn't some playful game of cat and mouse. It was a battle of wits, a high-stakes game of strategy. Even the astute Dylan didn't dare judge Charlize by conventional standards. To do so would be to make a fatal error. He began replaying every interaction they'd ever had. As a child, he had been captivated by Charlize's words that spoke of kindred spirits. She had wormed her way into his heart. Back then, his youthful focus had been entirely on Charlize herself, neglecting to consider more crucial questions. For instance, how had Charlize found him, given his deliberate efforts to remain inconspicuous? And how had she so conveniently procured the pain-relieving Xylos grass for him just before his mother's death? A chilling thought surfaced in his mind. Had she known all along that his mother would die? Coupled with Charlize's unusual hatred for the royal family and her fixation on the first emperor, it suggested a hidden motive for her entering the palace. Yet, after the former emperor's death, her animosity had shifted towards the magic tower. She had burned only the documents related to the Kira project and then left the palace. Dylan's racing thoughts hit a wall. He understood Payne's hatred for the magic tower because of his sister, but what was Charlize's reason? According to Payne, if Charlize had been a subject of the Kira experiments, she couldn't have possibly survived to adulthood. Recalling their first meeting, he hadn't perceived her as a thorny rose. Instead, she had felt more like a cold, sharp blade. Discarding all other hypotheses, no matter how improbable the sole remaining possibility seemed, he had to treat it as fact. That possibility being, Charlize had already lived through the future. Dylan found his own conjecture absurd. Either his obsession with Charlize had driven him to madness, or his deductions were accurate. The answer had to be one or the other. The usually decisive Dylan, in a rare moment of uncertainty, sought the opinion of his shadow guards. Had his fixation on his former tutor clouded his judgment? But the shadow guards wouldn't dare offer an opinion. Even when Dylan's killing intent leaked out, they remained silent. Fortunately, Dylan abandoned the line of questioning and instead asked what Charlize was doing. However, upon hearing that she was uncharacteristically spending all her time in the Empress's chambers, a sense of foreboding washed over him. He truly did understand Charlize. Indeed, upon learning that the sprites were actually low-ranking deities serving an ancient god, Charlize questioned them. Their responses were evasive. They called her Master Kira, yet also claimed she hated Kira. Suddenly, fragments of buried memories surged forth unstoppable. From the moment she had awakened as Kira, the sprites had appeared. They worshipped her as a star god and addressed her as Master Kira. The memory abruptly cut off. Charlize dared not delve any deeper, fearing she might fully embrace the malevolent god within and lose control of her murderous impulses towards Dylan. However, understanding the sprite's origins gave her a new advantage. She instructed them to mimic her habits, creating the illusion of her presence in the Empress's chambers. Meanwhile, she left the palace to seek allies who could assist her. She needed to find the Imperial tutor. If anything were to happen to him, the consequences would be dire. Calmly dispatching the magic tower remnants, the Imperial tutor, Charlize, heard a booming voice from afar. As a group approached, a single phrase, "You're late," revealed their shared purpose. It was to them that Charlize had sent the sprites with her message. She offered information about the sacred artifact of the Laughing clan in exchange for their assistance. But how could an outsider know about their family's most treasured possession? Filled with suspicion, the white-haired man raised his spear, threatening Charlize. "Explain yourself." The words had barely left his mouth when Charlize was upon him, stepping on his spear and silencing him. A shiver ran down the white-haired man's spine. He realized the vast disparity in their power. If she wished, they would all end up like the mage lying dead on the ground. "A wise man submits to circumstances," the white-haired man said, offering a swift apology. "Our clan can communicate with and tame magical beasts. And a tamed beast," he continued, "is faster than any other mode of transportation. For Charlize's second escape, their power will be essential to evade pursuit." With the agreement struck, the scene shifted to Dylan. Despite having confined all of Charlize's aides, a knot of unease still twisted in his gut. He rushed to the Empress's chambers, only to find Charlize draped in a provocative red negligee. She sat on the bed, the picture of a blooming red rose, softly inquiring as to the reason for his visit. Even the worldly Dylan couldn't help but blush, his heart quickening its pace. Maintaining a semblance of composure, he claimed his concerns stemmed from her absence. Charlize soothed him with gentle words, assuring him she had been there all day, never leaving. Yet, the flush in her cheeks and the almost primal scent clinging to her as she drew near told a different story. It all pointed to a hasty return. Charlize was lying. Dylan knew it with unwavering certainty. The conviction that she planned to escape again only deepened. But this wasn't the betrayer's fault, he reasoned. It was the fault of the one betrayed. She must have a compelling reason to leave. He needed to open her heart, to coax her into revealing her true feelings. Only then would she willingly stay by his side. The most beautiful things are often the most dangerous. Dylan wasn't oblivious to the calculations hidden beneath this tender display, yet he found himself powerless to resist. Even if it was just a fleeting infatuation on Charlize's part, he would savor every moment. Meanwhile, at the Rohan estate, a letter from Charlize arrived. Within, she inquired about the possibility of taking action against the Emperor. However, Charlize herself dismissed the request, certain they wouldn't agree to such a drastic measure. In the end, she simply asked them to divert attention away from her escape. The letter concluded with a plea for a reply, even a simple acknowledgement of her request. The three Rohan men were stung by the distrust woven between the lines. This was the first request from their guilt-ridden daughter and sister. Regardless of the cost, Charlize's needs would take precedence. So, they would not only divert the Emperor's attention, but also deploy troops to intercept his forces. However, once Charlize escaped this time, they knew they would never see her again. After her intimate encounter with Dylan, the elves reappeared. They simply inquired about the progress of Charlize's plans. But Charlize, ever perceptive, sensed they had more to say. After much hesitation, they finally confessed their dislike for Dylan, deeming him a dangerous presence. Charlize had assumed they would favor a true fragment of Eshelite. This unexpected answer left her wondering, was this supposed danger to her or to Dylan? As usual, when faced with crucial questions, the elves remained silent. But the answer no longer mattered. In a few days, everything would be over. She would escape again. This young man, whom she had nurtured, stirred a disquieting affection within her, a feeling that lingered even with the passage of time. If he weren't Kira Dylan, nor a fragment of Eshelite, would she still be so determined to flee? The more she understood her own heart, the more resolute Charlize became. She had to leave before her resolve crumbled. If Arkan tried to stop her, she would be forced to kill him. He was a masterful monarch, yet also a heartbroken puppy abandoned by his love. Upon finding his love again, he refused to be passive. Instead, he employed his superior intellect to uncover the truth he had been denied. In the Grand Hall, Kahu bowed respectfully to Dylan. He couldn't fathom the reason for this summons. Before Charlize's return, Dylan would occasionally call for him. However, a strange, almost unnatural discomfort always hung between them. Now that she was back, why summon him? The Emperor didn't keep him waiting long, bringing up Liz from the swordsmanship tournament long ago. Only then did Kahu realize that Charlize had asked the Emperor for Shadowbane, a herb known to alleviate the 7th princess's suffering. Considering their close relationship, Dylan should have known Liz was Charlize. What connection did this have to their current conversation? Dylan's voice, cold and somber, provided the answer. I just learned the truth. Knowing Master's character, he wouldn't have yielded unless he felt indebted. He continued, his gaze piercing. Why were you so afraid of me? Even when I was just the 13th prince, you were filled with suspicion. When you saw me with Charlize, your expression froze. You looked terrified, as if what you were seeing didn't align with the future you knew. The rhythmic tapping of my footsteps seemed to echo in Kahu's heart. In the future you experienced, who was the crown prince? This question shattered Kahu's composure. He looked at Dylan in fear, realizing he truly knew. But didn't stop there. Dylan even speculated about a connection between Charlize and Kira. Despite Kahu's desperate attempts to dismiss it as His Majesty's unrealistic fantasy, Dylan remained unconvinced. He methodically analyzed everything about Charlize. Her exceptional skills at only 15, defeating dozens of master swordsmen, her mastery of royal etiquette in various disciplines, and even her intimate knowledge of military secrets. There's only one possibility. Charlize has experienced the future, and so have you, Kahu. Did you also experience time regression? Kahu remained silent. Dylan continued, or perhaps it's unrelated to you. After all, you only knew about Charlize's disappearance. Dylan's speculations grew closer to the truth, and Kahu recalled Charlize's previous warnings. He was about to speak when a sudden announcement arrived. The Rohan family has rebelled. Dylan paused for only a moment, then exhaled. Everything was proceeding as he had foreseen. He would ultimately choose to flee. But the game of hide-and-seek should end now. This is our love story, a chase between us. It was also a battle of wits between two geniuses. Charlize had thought that sending his repentant family members would delay the enemy's advance. But he overlooked one crucial point. Dylan had ascended the throne to possess him. How could he care about a rebellion? Thus, as Charlize, having successfully met with the Laughing Clan and crossed the border, felt a strange pang of loss, he heard the rapid pounding of hooves behind him. Dylan had caught up. The mercenary company believed Dylan posed no threat. His Majesty's strength wouldn't be enough to stop their captain. However, a single, heartfelt plea, Charlize, how could you leave me again, made Charlize pause. Though he didn't turn back, telling Dylan to return, the man ignored him. Are you planning to leave without a word again? The aggrieved question was met with another, please go back. However, the man's next words were like a thunderclap on a clear day. taming me and then abandoning me? Is it because your true identity is the demonic sword, Kira? He didn't wait for Charlize to answer before beginning his analysis. Once he confirmed that Charlize had returned from the future, one question kept repeating in his mind. Why did Charlize leave him? And he found the answer. He hadn't wanted to pry, respecting Charlize's privacy. But once he dedicated himself to understanding everything, the overlooked details became clear. From Charlize's desire to make him emperor and Kahu's shock upon seeing him, he could confirm they came from the same future, a future where he wasn't even the crown prince. And yet, Charlize supported him in destroying the royal family. His obsession and hatred for the royal family and the magic tower, along with his foreknowledge and understanding of so many things, were beyond what someone his age should possess. It wasn't difficult to deduce that perhaps, in that original future, Charlize, in his short life, had suffered persecution at the hands of the royal family and the magic tower. And connected to both was Project Kira, the demonic sword. All signs pointed to him being Kira. After hearing this, Charlize didn't refute it, simply stating, "I am also one of the royal family members you hate." He thought he could draw a line that way. Indeed, but of all the royal bloodline, you forgave only me. This silenced Charlize. It was true. Aside from Dylan, all other members of the royal family were dead. He had let Dylan live. At that moment, Dylan began to walk toward Charlize. Leaving simply because you are Kira doesn't seem like a complete explanation. Payne, who had been listening, finally understood, exclaiming in belated surprise. He had always believed Charlize was a true fragment of Eshelite. Just as he was about to ask, Charlize gave him his answer, or rather, gave Dylan his answer. He was indeed the demonic god Kira. This answer shocked everyone. Everyone except one. With a radiant smile, Dylan pieced together the reason for Charlize's departure. Charlize, even if you kill me, it doesn't matter. Dylan's voice trembled. He doesn't care that he's Kira. He doesn't care if it leads him astray, ruins him. He's a peerless genius, unprecedented in history. He's an emperor, a conqueror, beloved by his people. Yet, this iron-blooded emperor is still a lovesick, earnest puppy. Even knowing that our meeting was orchestrated, a scheme of his own, that he pushed me onto this jade-like throne only to use me, I still accept it willingly. Haven't you been using me from the very beginning? Please continue to use me. Even if I starve, even if I live like an animal, I will obey. Broken, abject words tumbled out like tears in the eyes of an enemy. He knew it all, yet he claimed he hadn't taught him love. It was because of Charlize that Dylan had found meaning in his existence. Dylan's restrained tears suddenly burst forth like a flood. His composure shattered as he demanded, "Is it because you are the evil god, Kira, that you're afraid I'll die?" Charlize remained silent. Dylan pressed a reverent kiss to Charlize's hand. "Whether you are Kira or the demonic sword, your essence is still human. You're the person I love. I won't die. I will find a way." Charlize finally wavered. Perhaps these were the words she longed to hear. Dylan continued, promising he wouldn't be so possessive, that he wouldn't try to monopolize her anymore. He would even fully support Aphrilio. "If your goal is to destroy the magic tower, I will support you with all my might." With that, Dylan rolled up his sleeve, revealing a pact woven with magic. "A pact with my life as the price. Since I've wagered my life, I will absolutely uphold this contract." These words sent ripples of unrest through the Aphrilio members behind him. A pact with such a price meant even Ardenac posed no threat to them. It was a completely unequal agreement. With a wave of the Emperor's hand, the entire army behind him dropped to their knees. Yet, even this failed to move Charlize. "Is it still not enough?" Dylan whispered, hope draining away. Just as Dylan abandoned all expectation, a single sentence, like a beam of light, saved him. "If you cannot uphold your oath, your majesty, you will die." Tears welled in Dylan's eyes as he smiled. She agreed. He grinned like a fool, oblivious to Charlize's words about leaving after the magic tower's destruction. Achieving his goal was all that mattered. He didn't know how to suppress his possessiveness toward Charlize. But if she softened because of his humility, then of course he would use this method to keep her. She was his celestial emperor. He had secured his beloved with his life as the bond. He had not only shown courtesy to his followers, but also pardoned the Rohan family's treason. But what puzzled them most was that the leader they followed was the demonic sword, Kira. Their incessant discussion of this fact finally reached Charlize outside the door. It was time for the truth. I'm the most complete experimental subject of the Kira project. That is why I want revenge on the royal family and the magic tower. Charlize slowly entered the room. Her words echoed their discussion. Payne, however, remained skeptical. He had never heard of such an experiment. But then, the magic tower pulsed with a resounding boom, and a surge of malevolent energy washed over them, forcing him to confront the reality of her words. Charlize recounted her abduction by the magic tower, the torture she endured, and the process of becoming an experimental subject by consuming the fragments. Yet, they still struggled to believe her. No one understood the agony of that process better than those who had been experimental subjects themselves. How had she survived? And she was clearly human. The implication was clear. If the experiment was successful, why did she retain her human form? After all, the Kira project was meant to transform living people into swords. But these questions remained unanswered. She couldn't say. She wouldn't say. If they wanted to leave, they could. It was absurd, after all, for a Frilio, a group of former experimental survivors, to follow Kira. Payne, Charlize called out. Payne, still lost in thought, didn't need to answer. His expression betrayed his thoughts. He was likely thinking that the Kira project couldn't have been successful, otherwise the magic tower wouldn't still be creating evil gods. But the potent, malevolent energy emanating from Charlize defied explanation. He wasn't sure if Payne could keep a secret, but one thing was certain. Whoever the true Ashylite shard was, he would protect them to the end. With this thought, Charlize addressed Payne, using both his title and name. Payne Ben-S, if you want to protect the true Ashylite shard, then Dylan is the one you need to guard. He desperately wished he were the true shard. But whether in the past or the future, Dylan was the true Ashylite shard, a height he, as a fallen god, could never reach. Charlize saw Dylan again 3 days later. He was no longer the composed emperor, but an ardent youth overflowing with affection. I missed you so much. The word struck Charlize like a physical blow. She gripped her wrist tightly, fighting to maintain her composure. A blush betrayed her inner turmoil, contradicting her casual reply. Didn't we just see each other recently? Dylan happily took Charlize's hand. He found it strange, too. Whenever he was with his teacher, he seemed to lose all track of time. His words transported Charlize back 3 years. After they had attended the opera and dined together, he had said the same thing, that being with her altered his perception of time itself. Even the food before them was the same as what he had favored before she left. This unwavering affection, the memory of his desperate pleas and tears, made it difficult for Charlize to meet his gaze. But the unanswered questions and the truths she tried to conceal would eventually be unearthed by Dylan. As expected, the cheerful youth's expression crumbled, and he asked, his voice thick with sorrow, "Why did you leave?" "Because I wanted to protect you." For the first time, Charlize spoke these words to her enemy without reservation. A smile touched his tear-streaked face as he continued, "Were you afraid I would die?" Charlize didn't avoid his gaze. A gentle expression softened her features. "Yes, I was very afraid." She even confessed a truth she had never uttered before. "Because I love you."